Meeting to order. Please call the roll, Barb.
I have noted the roll. You have quorum.
All right, thank you. Could I get a motion to recess to a learning session?
So moved.
I'll second.
Move and a second. All in favor, please signify by saying aye and raising your hand.
Aye.
Aye. First item in the learning session is the special education study presentation. We have guests to present this evening, so welcome.
Thank you. I'm George Holt, and this is Barb Turleen, and our partner who's mentioned is Carol Hokinson. And you may recognize our names from MDE. We have a history with special education funding and data, and in data analysis of the Division of School Finance. We'd like to clarify, since for a year long, we started in March, and
wish we'd have been here a year, but
actually we've been welcome since March. We're going to be going through 2 of the 5 topics of our study. We did the demographics of special ed finance, para-info, professional development, and IEP review. However, tonight we're going to focus on the demographics and the special education funding, as these might be of greatest interest to the Board of Education. Okay. You can see that when we were requested to do a comparison, we compared Stillwater to 6 other districts. You can see them listed. The first item is enrollment trends, and the first chart you see is for fiscal year 11 through 16. If you look to the very far right, there are 2 columns that I'd like to call to your attention. Resident ADM means those kids whose parents or guardians reside in your district. And adjusted ADM means the students you serve. So you had a 1.5% high there, and are you okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Relax.
Take a breath.
I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you, George.
The resident ADM decreased by 1.5%. Those are kids that reside in your district, but your overall served reduced by almost 4% in that same time period. So that has an impact on your budget and your revenue. So turning the page to the projections that have been provided by the districts, this is the resident and adjusted ADMs out through 19. And you can see that the resident ADM is projected to decline by 6.5%. However, the adjusted ADM is only expected to decline by a little over 1%. We are focusing on percentage of free and reduced. Now this is more than getting a free lunch, because for every student that is identified as being free, you get compensatory revenue. And for every student who's identified as reduced, you get half of the basic revenue. In addition, it has an effect on your Title I and your special education federal allocations. So we've been looking at this, and we'll be talking more about it in the report. But everybody thinks that free and reduced is just the meals. It's a major revenue stream for your district.
the 4th section is called Special Education Child Count. Every December 1st, the district has to count the students with IEPs that they are serving in district and for those that they have placed. So that includes the public, the non-public, and the homeschool kids. And I'd like to call your attention to column 1, Child Count Resident students in district for school fiscal year 2016 was 1,276. Jump over to column 3, where we're looking at your total enrollment. You do a simple division to get, in the 3rd section, the percent of total enrollment is 13.95. At the bottom of that column, you want to compare it to your state average, which is 14.36. Bottom line, you are just slightly below the state average, and so you're right in the pack of where the state is looking at the percent served. On the next page, we look at changes from 2006, 2007 to 2016, 2017 on where you have gone up or down in serving what kinds of kids. There's 4 that we...
Slow down.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Sure. Okay, are you on this chart at the top? Perfect. Okay. The first column shows you the numbers of the current year. The third column shows you the count from 10 years ago. So what we're looking at are changes over 10 years of each of the disability areas, okay? We want to bring 4 to your attention, and those are in bold. The first bold area is EBD, Emotional Behavior Disorder. This group of kids, often with challenging behaviors, from a numbers perspective, has dropped slightly in the 10 years. But the next 3 areas I'd like to point out have done the opposite. They have increased. What's of interest here is the other health disability group includes those kids often that have the attention deficit disorders, the hyperactivity disorders, or those affected by fetal alcohol syndrome. That number has gone up in 10 years, 77 students. The next biggest jump actually is the autism spectrum disorder. In 10 years, that has gone up 140 kids in the district. But this is not out of line with state and national trends with ASD. It's in the news, there's lots of research and theories and a lot of energy put into serving ASD students. And the final is the developmental delay, the little kids, birth to 2. That has gone up 79 kids, so that you have those 3 areas of growth, and these follow the state trends. These are the exact 3 areas that the rest of the state, on average, is also growing in.
Is EBD with the trends that are declining?
Yes.
Is that also on the same
Yes,
trends?
yes,
Okay.
it is.
Okay,
Yes, it
thanks.
is. I think the only one that wasn't with the state trend was possibly learning disabilities. Learning disabilities statewide has dropped a little bit more than Stillwater has.
Was the definition of someone who's on the autism spectrum disorder back in 2006, 2007 the same as they define it now in 2017?
No, it has broadened. The definition has also just added like the spectrum, so that it used to be a narrower definition and now it's broader. But each state determines their own eligibility, so it's hard to do a state-to-state comparison. But within Minnesota, we've been pretty consistent in its growth, but the growth has slowed slightly, even though the numbers look like they're skyrocketing. It's a very interesting area, interesting field, and very challenging to staff.
Question, please.
Sure.
A question I have, particularly in those areas that are high, that are increased. Is it because it's occurring more or being diagnosed more, or both?
I don't know if I could answer that for sure. I would say possibly both. Our assessment tools are better. We have earlier intervention when kids are very, very young, even born. Our hospitals are providing identification and support right away when babies are born. We have a lot of medical advances where kids are living longer than they used to with medical complications. And we have a lot of attention to appropriate identification. Our assessment tools have improved, our practices have improved, research has improved. It's probably a number of factors. But it's not unique to Stillwater, it's statewide.
And then an important question for me is earlier diagnoses. Does that produce better learning for kids?
Absolutely it does. The earlier that you can catch kids that have delays in any area, whether it's speech or motor ability or learning, the earlier you catch them, the better it is for the cost over time. So there's an awful lot of interest in Minnesota to put a lot of dollars into early childhood and pre-K because of the great results.
Yeah. And again, I know cost is relevant. I'm most concerned about learning results. So I think you're saying yes to that as well.
Yes,
Thank you.
it's a good investment. The last chart here that I'm going to cover is the ages of students with disabilities. It just shows you 2 pockets where your growth has been the highest in Stillwater. The first being birth to 2, because remember that has gone up significantly in 10 years. And the other group, age group, is your transition, 18 to 21. So the early, youngest kids and the oldest kids are your greatest areas of the clusters of growth.
I'd like to now call your attention to the staffing ratio, and this is a comparison between the 6 other districts in Stillwater. And the column I like to have you look at is the very far right, where it talks about the ratio of special ed students to licensed special ed teachers. Remember, this is teachers. So we're talking not paraprofessionals or school psychologists, this is licensed teachers. You have a ratio of 17.5 students with IEPs to a teacher. You are the most efficient of all the districts. Part of this, I think we're going to attribute to the organization, how you organize your programs. The second that is a big factor is your due process clerks. You've hired due process clerks, and they take care of organizing the meetings, doing the notices, the mailings, keeping those files in impeccable order, because we did the review and found that, woof, they're from one building to the next. They were organized, efficient to look at, and completely documented, So that is a big factor that took a lot of time from teachers, keeping them from doing the job of teaching. So we are very efficient in your organization and your students with disabilities to the staff ratio. Another thing.
I think I understand due process clerks. You started with organization. Can you say
Organization
more
means
about that?
how your buildings are organized and your programs are. Now, that's going to be changing with your organization, moving your students from middle school to a high school. But how you have your groups of teachers and how you have got the organization where people actually move from building to buildings. So your structure is we think the organization, how they have teachers with students is very efficient.
And are you going to tell us how that's going to change that when we go from junior high
Can't
to middle
project that
schools?
far into the future because we're not sure how you're going to have your teachers and where because you're moving your transition program, you're going from 9 to 12. We're not sure how that's going to break out. But you have some good administrators who know how to seem to make this work because it's efficient.
Yeah, but the part of the question you began with the statement that this was a very efficient way to do it. In your broader experience, do middle schools do that better than junior highs, or is it hard to say?
They're in all the range of the spectrums. I've been in almost every school district in the state when I was a fiscal monitor, and I saw everything. So I say it depends upon how you structure.
So there's no guarantee either way. It can
Well,
work
there's no
very well,
guarantees.
or it can work less well.
Yeah.
Thank
But
you.
the way they've talked about it, how they're having their clusters and their organization, I think they're on the right track. From the discussions we had with the teachers and when we were in the buildings, they were talking about how they're clustering the kids and the teachers. That usually brings better results.
Good, glad to hear that.
But I've also seen the opposite, called chaos.
So stay tuned is what you're saying.
But I do think one of your best investments, and I'll say it over again, has been the due process books. We worked with them, and when we saw the files and how they were organizing lives for the teachers and notifying the teachers and the regular ed teachers and the parents, that takes time. And they're doing it rather than your teachers.
And Kathy, wasn't that part of the last round of negotiations that was part of our contract negotiations? Was
The discussion on the
Yeah.
process? Yeah, we talked about that.
Can we go on to the next section, which is transportation? This is special transportation only. We're not looking at the costs that get included in your special transportation, which is your care and treatment, your 504 kids, the kids who are homeless. Those kids are not included, nor are their expenditures. Kirsten understands that when I say Finance 723. The cost of living seems to be the only factor in your growth rate from 11 to 16 as you compare it to the other districts. That's a typical cost of living increase. Very efficient transportation. And I understand you have something like 45 buses and vans and type 3 vehicles, and they go get your kids. Now, that's being very efficient. However, when we looked at the cost per membership hour, you're a little higher, but you're being still efficient. Does that make sense? How your cost per kid hour of school is higher, or middle of the pack really, but your costs don't go up. You're being very efficient about organizing your transportation.
Relative to the other districts?
Yes.
Oh, yes, look at your comparison pool on those,
Look at,
some very high
Forest-
numbers
Forest
there.
Lake is a very good comparison, 66%.
But isn't Forest Lake one of the largest in terms of go-get kids?
Well, a part of their factor could be they joined 916, the intermediate, so they're further north of intermediate 916, which is south.
So they're
So they're
driving-
transporting
I'm on
those
board
kids
for
further.
960, I know
Yeah.
what you're talking about, yeah, thank you.
But they do have a large geography, but they still have an organization, and, but they're moving into, some kids into 916 because they joined as a member. 916 refused to take children who were not members because they were full, and they can do that. So they joined along with St. Francis, so they have places for kids who have extreme needs.
Yeah, St. Anthony's Village as well.
Yes.
Graduation.
Next item, oh, this is a tough one, okay? You're gonna need some pens for this one, because graduation rates are hard to conceptualize. So may I start out with saying, when you look at the graduation rate in the very first column, please write that as a class of 16 when you look at year 4. When you look at year 5, that is the class of 2015. And when you look at the 6-year rate, that is the class of 2014. These are how the data are presented from the Minnesota Department of Education and are clustered into 4 groups: a graduation rate, a dropout rate, a continuing rate, and unknown. Now, continuing rate means that the student continued after the year it was reported. So if you have a class of 16, which is your 4-year, and you look at continuing in 4 years, there were 43.21% of the special ed students who continued to the 5th year. Is that making sense? Because when you look at this chart, you can't add the numbers, please. So, if you look at FY16 for special ed students, the 16 graduating class, you're significantly below the state average by 20 points. But if you look at the 6th-year graduation rate, that would be the class of 2014, you're right within the state average. What we're finding is that 43% that continues from year 4 to year 5, 27% continue from year 5 to year 6, and you even have 18% that are continuing from year 6, and we don't have data on year 7. If we did, your graduation rate might be even different. You'll see that some graduate their students in 5 years in special ed. Your kids that are continuing are in your transition program.
So this is saying it takes our students longer, almost the same number finally get there. It just takes them longer to get there.
And you may be even better if we just knew what happened to that 18% at the end of 7 years.
Now, from a kid's point of view, parent's point of view, legally, a student who has been identified can stay around longer if they choose.
That's an individualized
It's tricky.
decision,
IEP.
and it's based on the IEP, and it's also based on when they graduate, they graduate. So if you get your diploma at the end of 4 years, education is finished. But you have, through the IEP process, if there are needs that are identified and there are objectives to be completed, then you have another year of school until you reach your objectives.
Okay, so
Through
then-
21.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Well, they actually, if you turn 21 in September, you can almost be 22 before you leave the system. And that's your 6 year. Okay.
So you're providing the demographics. Does that mean that goes back to Paul, then you, and you look at the why and what's happening?
Yep. And
That'll be kind of the,
we also are going to ask you to take a look at the why of the 16% dropout at the end of year 4.
Okay.
What happened?
Who are they?
Who are they? What were the factors? When you have declining enrollment of 1% that affects your budget, every one of these kids who has dropped out is a lost student in more than just economic terms. And if you can find out what is the reason, can you correct it, can you adjust for it, that's a factor.
Now, every additional year that it takes before they choose to graduate, are you funded the same or does it vary?
Actually, kind of, to the degree you get the gen ed revenue and the special ed aid to a point, okay? When they turn that 22nd year old, before, like I said, the August kid or the September kid, you get no gen ed revenue for that year. You'll get state aid. And we're going to talk about the cost of transition in a moment, okay? I'd like to continue on in benefit rates.
Let me hold you up just a minute.
Sure,
What
sure.
do we learn from looking at Roseville, White Bear, and Elk River, just because they're kind of bunched there together? What do we learn by looking at their numbers compared to ours?
I think the difference is when they start transition. See, the state rules say you must start addressing transition in 9th grade. And I believe that sometimes the focus is on it, is on other things until we get to the 12th grade and then we start transition. We looked at some IEPs and that seemed to have been the trend. So what they're doing is, and I think that this is true for Farmington especially, they start the transition program with 916 in the 9th grade and really focus on it in the 11th and 12th grade, where they're out doing their job skills, their jobs, they rent an apartment for life skills, they're doing the things in the 4-year period of getting the kids all the skills they need in transition. But the focus goes away from the academics and those things of a traditional high school to being the focus of transitioning.
So you're saying that that's an area of potential growth for this district based on these numbers?
And I think you have a unique opportunity because you're clustering your transition program into a new facility.
Right, and having the 9th grade joining the high school, so you have that full 9th through 12th grade in one setting. Because when we talk about transition, we're talking about post-secondary educational skills, vocational skills, and independent living skills. Those are the 3 areas in which all students, we need to analyze where are their skills in those 3 areas, along with their math skills and their reading skills and all those important skills as well. And we need to kind of bring them through a series of standards, by the time they're in 12th grade, if they've met kind of those standards so that they're ready to go on to post-secondary or onto a vocational or work experience and have the skills to be independent, then they really have met their IEP goals in that area and can graduate. So I think one of the things we'll be looking at closely is, we want our kids to be ready at the end of 12th grade because they want to move on like all the kids. Now, we're certainly going to have a sector of kids that are really going to need that continuing of those 3 years. But we want to have that program in place for them.
That's my question, philosophically or reality-wise. Do kids reach independence or do they reach independence at varying degrees?
Yeah, absolutely, varying degrees. And, our goal would be to have, our students have experience in the skills and being able to demonstrate mastery of the skills that, a typical senior would have. There's still more learning that we all know as we move into adulthood, but it bridges that gap for those students and gives them an opportunity that way. So.
Can you speak to what we've had a rise over the past few years in the transitions program, and that's the opportunity for us to change. Is there a reason why? I mean, was there a decision or is there a culture is there a good reason why we've done it that way?
I think there's various reasons, and I think that, again, that's something that our kind of our task force, will really dig into and try to analyze some of those reasons and then look at that. One of the things I do know, we have a very high focus on academics, and so I think for a lot of our families and coming into the high school, it's, it's time to do school as traditional school is done, and then we'll deal with transition later on. So sometimes that's the key, but it's kind of integrating those skills into programming in a way that's not real different, and I think we can do that. But I think that can be part of it.
Just to add a little sideline, because we talk about graduation rates, and we focus on special ed because that's what we're about. But your graduation rate overall is higher than the state average. You're right up there, folks. So this is a group that's kind of getting Well, and if you look at you're losing 16% of your graduating class of 16 and 15% of your class of 15 the first year. There's got to be some rationale behind that, and maybe that's where some in-depth review, and just find out why. Can you correct, can you adjust for the future, and facilitate that? Anytime you have a dropout of a kid who with an IEP, especially a kid with a significant involvement, that they're not out there working like we typically think of employment as a rule. And that's where I'd like to see if we can be facilitative of that.
So are you suggesting perhaps that those students who are choosing to drop out also, they should have had their needs met sooner, and maybe they wouldn't have chosen to drop out? So
That could be one of the
part of the
rationales.
decision to start the transition process earlier might meet the needs of those students better too.
We don't know why they dropped out. They're unknown.
It's possible, yeah.
One key I want to tell you, and I want to commend your Mars person. Did you notice that your column for the unknowns is 0? That really affects your graduation rate. You must know she must know every kid in this district personally, because you don't see zeros. So commending the Mars coordinator here.
Some of our out-of-district
Oh,
districts out of the metro area have a large number of unknowns, which really impacts.
the graduation
Yeah.
rate. And that makes you wonder what happened to those kids, right?
Yeah.
So
So
kudos
this
there.
is- At least you know where your kids are, so maybe now you can do some follow-ups.
Well, I wanted to,
Go ahead.
sorry, I wanted to add to what Sarah said, because I absolutely agree with that. And I think that some students, there are just too many barriers that they cannot, and they may not come from a family that has the means or the navigation of the system to access the services that they need. And so, and any
Good
student falling
point.
through the gap is not okay, but I think we have to also look at the totality of our systems, right? Because this doesn't happen in isolation. We're looking at healthcare, we're looking at housing, we're looking
Yes.
at jobs.
All of
It's
that.
an integrated system.
It
And so,
all come together.
exactly.
Or it doesn't come together for a kid, that's the problem. Our system sometimes lets them go through.
George, tell me, I've spent a good part of my life as an assistant principal. Is there a gray area between the kid who's not intending and the kid who is a dropout?
I'm sorry, I can't,
Oh, the dropout being when they actually are identified as a dropout, and when they ceased before that from attending.
all we look at is the data that says they're no longer accounted for the next year,
Yeah.
and they hadn't graduated.
And what I'm implying is that a lot of times, there's a gap between when it's occurring and when it's recorded.
Yes. Because it doesn't always end at the end of the year, they disappear.
Not as soon, you know what I mean? People, and it's not because of lack of effort on the part of educators or attendance clerks or whatever. It's, they kind of keep calling, reminding, or whatever efforts they're putting into that. But I'm saying, a lot of times my experience has been, there's a big gap there.
There is.
Right, and not even of the student, right? Because I would reframe and challenge the word dropout and push out. I mean, a lot of our students, for whatever reason, I mean, so the onus cannot lie.
It's not with the kid, it's with all of us.
Exactly.
It's the
So-
parent, it's the community, it's the school, it's all of us together for kids.
And I'm also wondering too how it plays into just the stigma, because I just personally have known some families who are reticent to perhaps seek services for their child because of the perceived or maybe some cultural perceptions around special education and what that looks like. So I'm wondering how that kind of interplays with.
It's all there.
Okay.
Because I think you're playing on, there is a reticence to put a kid into special ed, there's a residence about what label they get. I mean, come on, we know we've been there. And there's a residence about what does it do for my kid? And why going to a special room. It also says something about how we as educators display what really special ed is. It's an education. It's a program within our schools, very much like your advanced placement classes. It deals with kids where they are. But we give it labels. And in our society, we love to label things.
Right. So I'm a parent of a special ed student, and with his IEP, I really feel like in some ways, all of our students should have that kind of individualized set of circumstances, so to speak, of knowing what environment is going to work best in order to support that child's achievement. And so,
I think that kind of spilled over when you have a student in an ALC program, you now have a continuous learning plan. They want you to focus on where the kid is, and there's going to be even more pressure on this with the new Supreme Court decision.
absolutely.
It's going to make us say to where should the kid be and how are we going to get him there, and not just minimal is going to work. Going to have progress. This is a really tough concept, and you handled it really well. Thank you.
That 40% needs to be much higher next year, I think.
You need to start, that's got to be an achievement.
That needs, yeah, that's got to start
Well, and even the
yesterday.
graduation rate, just saying that
Yeah.
we're above the state average is
Yeah.
not,
You're above the state average
not
for
finding much
kids.
solace in
Right,
that, but.
But when you know, and then we got to keep that in kind of perspective, but there's a
Right.
group of kids
You have to dig deeper,
that you
find
got
out
to dig
what's
deeper
going on.
on.
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, excellent.
Now,
Excellent
overall, they're
comparison.
graduating just fine with the state average when you get down to the very end. And maybe even higher if you had that 7th year. But why are we having this many kids drop out in the meantime of getting to that 6th year? That's our point. And we're going to be looking at that in terms of the recommendations, okay? Special ed benefit costs, you can see your benefit is significantly up there. And you got to remember that some districts pay this with federal funds and some districts pay the MA funds, and so the benefit rate could be less. But for every $100 on an average that you spend for a special ed staff member, you're going to pay $48, almost $49 in benefit costs. I like to, that's negotiation, that's the way to. Prepare a professional, because we were asked to look at that. Every district I've ever worked in this last year, I think there were like 60 some. The question was paras. And so, you know, do we have too many? Do we have enough? Do we have the right kind of para? Do we have, you get 100 different questions about paraprofessional. And I like to remind you that they are paras and they are professional. Because we found some very interesting data with your paras, like how long you've been able to keep them on the average is 9 years. Okay? And you'll get more of that data in the final report, but this is kind of way up there in the
Kind of the
balcony.
cost.
Is that
Yeah.
really high?
Pardon?
Is that high?
That's good.
It's very low turnover?
When my experience 4 years in St. Paul, if I had the same body at the beginning of the year, at the end of the year, I thought I was blessed.
People like to work here, absolutely.
Now, the paraprofessionals, you're right in the average of the group. The cost, you'll see cost per IEP kid is $1,600. The average is $2,200, but there's no benefits in this. So you got to keep that in mind when you look at this. The one thing I like to point out, and you know your para salaries are below the average, but again, the benefits aren't there, okay? What I think is important to look at is how many paras on this next chart, how many paras, FTE totals, do you have to IEP enrollments? In other words, you have one para for every 7 kids in this district. You're right in the middle of the pack.
Doesn't that vary though, depending on the
You will find that Mounds View is quite, if you looked at their number of one-to-one paras, which is coming up, we didn't put in here, but you'll have it in the final report, they vary all over the waterfront. It depends on what programs they had, and at one time, Mounds View had a very intensive EBD program, which involved a lot of paras and a lot of costs. That was for 4 districts. Now they've closed their enrollment because they're growing and they're out of space, and they've disbanded that EBD program.
Yeah. See, if we went back to, say, one of your earlier charts where you had the very different list of different needs that kids have.
Yes.
Are there some, or does it depend on a program?
Depends upon the kid.
Okay, so,
ASD kids can be in gifted classes, or they could be in their SMI class.
okay, but I'm saying in terms of, and maybe you've answered that, that's why they call it the I is in the definition, but are there certain types of needs or disabilities that make use of paras more than others, like autism, versus
Autism, other health
EBD.
impaired, you're medically fragile, other health impaired kids.
And that
really.
makes sense.
Yeah.
very
And you've
much.
got
That's their
kids who are EBD and you need them for behavior and behavior management. You have kids who are in the severe profound DCD, and they have some self-help needs that causes you to have paras. So it does have a tendency to focus with certain disabilities, but it runs their gamut.
Your figure for the full-time paraprofessionals, those are just paraprofessionals that are doing special education work.
That's correct.
And then you've got an average cost, 25 something for the districts that you use. In your experience with other districts in the metropolitan area,
They range because of how they classify their paras. In St. Paul, there were two groups of paraprofessionals. One is that there was a program para, like you would see here. And then there were the educational assistants who were higher paid, higher experienced, higher educated, but they still were paras, could have different duties, and they were under the teacher's contract. So they were quite costly. So it varies from district. You go to rural areas, some make 11,000, some make 9,000. It just varies so much, but your high cost of paras goes by negotiations.
Now, one of the things you talked about earlier was 916. And one of the things, especially with Carter Blue, that deals with kids who are level 4, very, very highly challenging and needy, we're going to be affected very soon because we're going to open Pankalo, which will cover the same types of kids. What impact will that have on cost or need, or is that to be determined?
You have to understand, I worked with Christine Carr a great deal when she was building Carter Blue, because I was supervisor of special ed funding and data. And she'd say, okay, George, can we use $1.5 million of our MA funds to build a playground? And would you come out and see if we can do this and be eligible for state aid or whatever? So she was going crazy over that building. So let's put it this way, if you have a student at 916, you're going to get a tuition bill through the automatic tuition billing system that is substantially more than typically what it costs for a district. Now, if you were in 287, I would say you were really significantly above. But yeah, your cost, because remember, they're dealing with significantly needed kids that have a large cost to them because they do have a significant support system in Carter Blue. I mean, that building is designed for kids with significant learning needs.
A lot of related services
Oh.
staff involved as well,
So what I think you're saying here, and I'm not opposed to that, I think that's what the need is, and the reason that kids are at Carter Blue and will be at Pankalo is because they are extremely
Significant.
needy. And for us, where we are geographically, Carter Blue didn't make sense. That's
Right.
not the case now for South Wash, for us, and for North St. Paul, etc., because this facility is going to be very much closer.
And you're going to have less transportation costs, if you think about it too.
But in terms of servicing kids, it's probably going to increase.
Well, and I believe we have 2 students that will be starting when they open. We don't currently have any students at Carter Blue. So I think we will benefit from having that location close by. I don't, typically, and George, correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't know if this is getting to your question, but we've kind of always thought if you have 6 or 7 students that have a high level of need, you do pretty well building your own program within a district.
Absolutely.
But when you get kind of below that, you're really better served by using the services of 916.
To explain Carter Blue, if I can give you an example, when we were talking, Christine and I were, she said, I'm thinking about putting in 4 one-on-one rooms. Now, one-on-one rooms is not what you think about. It's 1 teacher, 1 kid, and 3 paras. And she called me in August and said, before Carter opened, she said, George, I don't have 1 kid in there. I said, let me tell you my experience. 50 years of experience says, if you have a space, you'll have a kid.
And that's how-
So when school opened, she had 3 on the waiting list and the 4 were filled. So it's how you design the services is what I'm trying to get to Those kids had serious needs, and they had to be addressed.
And for the benefit of the audience, Carter Blue is very close to Blaine,
Right.
and the new Pancalo is around the machine shed, so you can
It's
understand.
right off 35 and Snelling is where Carter Blue is, or Lexington, and it's a beautiful facility.
George, I appreciated your language on that. I think sometimes when we're talking, the duality that I hold with this is that while this is really important information, it's too easy to dehumanize, and we're just talking about stats and numbers, and we're not knowing that there's families and students and stories behind these. And so just that language of, just like it's not an autistic kid, it's a kid who has autism, and not needy kids, but kids with some serious or different range of needs. So I appreciate it.
Really is an important concept, these are kids first. As I tell people, you gotta remember that every child who comes through your doorway generates gen ed revenue. Be that kid with an IEP, a kid who's in a gifted class, the kid who gets in a wheelchair and gets wheeled through. Every kid generates gen ed, and that's what they start with, their student first. I always try to work with that. I do want to talk a little bit about cross-subsidy because I know we're running way over time, and I'm sorry. You'll notice that the chart on cross-subsidy, I want you to look at the ones with comparison districts. This is important stuff for us in the finance world. It's a percent of the general ed revenue that goes to pay for the unreimbursed cost of special education. So if you look at the chart, you can see that Stillwater's cross-subsidy percentage has gone up over the years, and with the new funding formula, you're right in with a pack that has a significant increase. As a person in special ed, I always am concerned about gen ed, because general education revenue is anytime you take $1 to put to special ed, you are having $1 less for the kids in school. Okay? I've always been concerned about the cross-subsidy. You're caught in a maintenance of effort because you cannot decrease the cost that you're expending unless you have those 4 reasons in federal law. But if you look at your cross-subsidy, the average for the districts is 12.5% going from your general fund, the general ed revenue that Kirsten has to budget, goes towards the cost of special education. You'll see that White Bear Lake is up to 14.4%. You'll see that, I'm sorry, I kind of moved us on to the next page.
11 and 12.
11 and 12. I had to split this chart because Stillwater is listed both times, because this otherwise it would have been a microscopic type and you'd had to have a microscope or hand lens to read the data. So I split the chart with 3 districts on the top and 3 districts on the bottom, always with Stillwater. So it's just so the ease of reading. You'll see that the cross-subsidy of special education is a concern, and you're right in the middle of the pack as far as the amount percentage-wise that goes from general education revenue and into your general fund that goes to pay for special ed. Now, I'm concerned, here's the concern I have, and then we'll talk about it, just some wrap-up points here. We didn't present you 4 parts of the report because this would be the most focused of it, for a board to look at. It'd be of greatest interest. But we'll have in the full report talking about the paras, the training needs, the staff training needs, the related services, caseloads, workloads, also a lot more demographics. So you'll have a lot more information. We're almost finished writing it and now getting to the editing point, and so we'll soon be delivering it. But we want to give you some takeaways. And the first takeaway, Barb, I know I don't have on the list, but I'd like to make it. Stillwater is a part of Minnesota. And Minnesota is one of only 12 of 53 states
And
that has
territories.
maintained the standards of the feds in compliance
And performance indicators.
indicators. Now, I think that's phenomenal, and I don't want to let that bypass us because we struggle and we think we're not getting anywhere. And that's school district's effort, not Department of Ed efforts, okay?
You collect the data and send it on.
We just collected
So
it.
it's your data.
It's your data as a district of Minnesota. So if you think of 12 of 53, now there are 53 states as far as education goes. There's the BIA, District of Columbia, and territories that add to the 53. 12 of the 53, and Minnesota is one of them, and stayed one of them. So I think it's phenomenal that our school districts are performing for children with disabilities. The first thing I really want to have you take away is that there's efficiency in your services and transportation. Your organization, support services, things that you're doing in special ed. The cost that you are having, as you can say, you're right in the middle of the pack of all the comparison districts. When you look at transportation, you're efficient, but when you look at the overall cost, you're right in the middle of this group. And Stillwater, as far as enrollment goes, is in the middle of the group also. So it's like you got the ranges, and Stillwater is there in the middle of the enrollment and everything, and you stay in the middle when you start looking. There's nothing outlined for you as far as costs or anything.
It goes true for the number of paras that are employed, and the costs were in the range as well. And that only difference was on benefits that George explained earlier.
You're having a decreasing enrollment for the adjusted ADMs. It's 1%. That means there's less money. So when Carol Hokinson and I, my former manager, and I were at MDE, we had said to districts there's only two choices. Increase your revenue, decrease your expenditures. What we're looking at is some ways that you can increase your revenue. And we're going to be real ambitious in our recommendations about how we think you can increase your revenue streams. Okay?
We're also going to be making some recommendations around professional development. We had a very wonderful experience interviewing paras and looking at data from the teacher-related services survey. And what's interesting to me is that their identified needs closely paralleled your growth areas around autism and other health disabilities, fetal alcohol syndrome, interest in trauma, things like that, social emotional behaviors. So we will be making some specific recommendations based on that data. And we really feel that training is going to be a great investment.
I want to tell you, I'm very happy to hear that. I feel, you know, just in this new position on the board, you talk to families and, you know, people, it's stress. It's a stressful thing for families, and it's also stressful for staff.
Yes.
There you go.
And
Yes.
we need to be cognizant of that.
Yes.
And so I'm very pleased to hear that. And when will we get a report on that? Not that I'm counting the days, but is that coming up relatively soon in the next couple of months? Or?
We're
mid-June.
talking days, we hope to have it done.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you so
One
much.
thing we did not address, nor we were part of our study, but I think it's something you need to look at in the future. You know, we talk about training of the paras and the teachers and everybody. What about opportunities for training of the parent? Because we don't get a lot
Right.
of training and certification in parent training. We aren't looking at that, so it's something that's out there. But I
But I
think
did look at it at the state level on the parent survey, and that was one of the lowest responses statewide by districts in a 1 year after graduation, or just the year that they're being monitored, they interview parents, and that was one of the lowest responses, was the availability of parent training statewide. So we're going to probably massage that a little bit because we really believe in it. It's a good investment as
you
well.
you have a child. Do you have a certificate to have a child? No. And do you have the training and skills? And then you get a child with a disability and look how that compound, and look at the diverse rate in children, families with disabilities.
It's a lot of stress.
Absolutely.
George, before you leave, key question, you talked about cross subsidies. And we know pretty much what it is on the local level. On the state level, I think it's 640 million or something like that. And in the governor's proposal, he proposed a step forward on that, picking up 40 million. Now, do you know, because it's happening as we're here, has the state
I have been
touched-
trying to find the bill, and I found two of them, and they contradict each other.
Yeah, because I haven't seen where they've moved at all.
But, well, there was three bills, if I could just take a moment, because it's going to impact you.
You bet.
The 1.5%, and then we got the 2%, and then 2% in the House, and we're not sure what the Senate's going to squeeze it with. But there's a couple factors in there that's kind of buried in the special ed funding. One was that MDE was recommending the removal of the amount per student for the growth. And that is serious for this district, every district.
Every district.
Another one was that they're going to increase the percentage of the excess cost data, and under the formula, as I understand it, that would not help you at all. There was another bill by Senator Anderson to double the per pupil amount per ADM served, adjusted ADM, which was doubling it. So it went from $80 to $160, which would have been a real benefit to districts of that cross subsidy. There was another discussion, and I didn't see anything come of it. 2 years ago, we had the cross subsidy reduction revenue, which was just given to districts to help reduce that cost on a basis of your expenditure. That was, I don't know where that went either.
Yeah. This one would be part, I think, of the omnibus bill.
I haven't looked at it.
That's, I haven't found it either. That's why I'm curious if
The
it's.
part that had the money said refer to the table, and there is no table.
We should
Be
know.
done yet.
I had another question
Apparently they're not
that
done.
maybe connects to the organizational piece, but, and this is for Dr. Lee as well. So throughout the years, anecdotally, we've heard about just the increased caseload and just some of the stressors that a lot of our staff are feeling, just in terms of maybe not having the adequate amount of supports that they feel they need to be able to best serve the students. So can you speak to, did that come up in
Yep.
your findings? And how did that look, and how did that surface?
Part of it came up in the teacher survey of how many kids were being case managed. In other
Okay.
words, that you're responsible for the programming and you're the main contact for the parent, as well as workload, how many kids you might see in a given day or week. And we found the range, just in our experience, former special ed directors, to be very reasonable. There were a couple of outliers, a couple of folks that, you know, that you always have to make a mid-year adjustment or an adjustment the following year, depending upon who's coming in and how many leave. But we found that to be kind of, we considered it reasonable. And I understand that there's going to be a little bit more study on that, looking at some caseloads, or, I don't know, Paul, there's some group that's kind of considering some of that information as well. But our you know, surface view, we did not hear a lot of complaints about impossible to work with from any perspective in any program of those that we interviewed. Now, there might be some people that didn't respond to the survey, or paras that we didn't sample, that have an opinion that is different than what we found in a sample. We just found it very reasonable.
The random sample, we used toss of the dice, by the way. Some people were wondering how they got selected. That was a big discussion point. We listed them, we numbered them, and we threw the dice. And how we counted the dice, and then we picked the para. For the teachers, it was open to everybody, and the related service. We did have a good response rate, by the way.
42% of the staff responded, and of the related services staff, it was even higher. It was in the 80s.
Does that commentary relate to the 17% efficiency that you were calling that really efficient? And I need to admit that my initial take of that was, is that efficient? That seems like more stress on the teachers, but maybe I'm completely reading
But
that
you know,
wrong.
it depends upon how you look at the data, because if you look at the data and say, do they have any, and you don't ask the question, do they have any support, then the data would be more concerning.
Okay.
But I
Okay.
found
Okay.
people that we talked to informally, and some in cases formally, and you're making even an adjustment this next year, is the behavior analyst. You have two of them, behavior specialists.
Okay.
They are
Huge
great
help.
support.
Huge help.
And then we had nothing but praise for those type people, and maybe there is a consideration because of the increased issues with behavior and emotion. Behind the scenes, we've had discussion on mental health services, okay? And how we can look at approaching that, and we talked to Denise and Paul about how things could be pieced together maybe. And a part of that is how it works with families, okay? We have one more.
Oh, we just wanted to make sure that everyone is really clear on how receptive the staff was at the buildings. The principals, the administrative assistants, the staff here at the district office, we just felt so welcome, and we were really honored and thanked repeatedly. There were a couple of little funnies when somebody said, "Are you guys from the Department of Ed?" You know, their eyes would kind of go like that. When we said no, they were going, "Oh, come on in." Really cute. But they just have been so receptive, and we've had to catch paras And then, of course, there's MCA testing, there's a field trip, there's a fire drill. They're sick, we're sick, all sorts of things, and so we had to reschedule, and they always made it happen. Things worked, it happened, it was delightful. It was a wonderful experience for us.
We went in one building 7 times, and we never heard, oh, it's you again. It was always welcoming. The last point I want to make really is important to us. Mary, Kelly, and Paul have been unbelievably helpful and supportive and facilitative. I mean, I can send the document to Mary. I said, can we get a couple copies so we can edit? And it was on our desk before we even finished. Kelly, we need to schedule. It was on our computers before we left. Paul, we need this question answered. It was there before I got home that night. That is significantly appreciated, and I think the board needs to know you got quality people here, folks. Not only in this building, but what we found in the buildings.
Great school culture. Yep,
I should hope so.
absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm sorry we ran over. I
It was-
hope you
Oh,
answered
no,
your
yes,
questions.
us,
you.
yeah,
It's on our-
exactly.
Any other questions that we did not answer? And I love your comment, Ms. Paula. Kids are first, and they're part of a family, and they're part of a community, and they're part of a school district.
My only request is that I would be really interested to see how the increased support services show up, especially when we are able to optimize the services for our students and have available resources to them every day in every building. And so kind of how that might impact graduation rates, some of these other things, and how we might better provide the services that our students deserve and need.
Now, the other side of the
Something to-
coin is, you people have asked some wonderful questions. That means you're really thinking and dealing with this. You don't forget to give yourself a pat on the back because you are taking this seriously. And thank you. Thank you. Your questions were marvelous. They indicated depth of learning. Thank you
Thanks
much.
for coming out
Thank
tonight.
you.
Yep.
It's gonna be an hour.
Thank you. I'll look forward.
Okay, our next topic is Read Well by Third Grade Plan. Karen Lateral.
Well, good afternoon or good evening, Superintendent Pontrelli, Chair Hefner, members of the board. I wasn't sure if it would be afternoon or evening yet. It's kind of right on the cusp of evening. I'm here to talk tonight about the Read Well by Third Grade Plan, which is part of our World's Best Workforce reporting. So this is one segment of what would be included in World's Best Workforce. As you know from previous years, that I'm here to update you on items that have happened this year and plans that we have moving forward for next year. I'm sure that you had, I call this a beach read, the plan, the actual plan with the information in it. A lot of it is very similar to last year, which is why I will go through and update you on the new information. And then I'll be back in June to seek approval for the plan so that we can submit it to the state. As you can see on the right-hand side here, the work that we do is governed by a statute, 120B.12, a Minnesota statute, that sets out a variety of different items that we are required to include in our plan. And so as you read through the plan, you'll see that these items are listed in the table of contents and are addressed throughout the plan as well. So the plan does align to the statute. In Stillwater, our goals, our primary goals, are to help every child read well or read above grade level by third grade. We are working toward that goal. We have not yet achieved it, but we are working toward it. And we are also working on bringing reading into the content areas, working collaboratively with our classroom teachers and even our secondary teachers to make sure that we're looking at disciplinary needs in the classroom. So for this particular year, 2016-2017, some of the items that we've accomplished is that we continued our implementation of PRESS, which is an elementary Tier 2 intervention for reading. We continued that with our kindergarten through second grade teachers, and we began implementation with our third through fifth grade teachers. For next year, we'll continue training and working with our teachers, and we'll continue with this program. The goal of this program is to look at students' data to see if they are struggling in certain areas of reading, and then to dig deeper with diagnostic assessments to determine what specific needs they have, and then target instruction to those particular needs in the classroom to bring them back up to grade level expectations. We also continued training our Read With Me interventionists in Orton-Gillingham, the Orton-Gillingham method, which is a multisensory phonics method. It's supported by Decoding Dyslexia organization, and it's also very well regarded in the reading world and very well researched in the reading world as well. It's been around since, I think, the early 20th century. So we continue training our interventionists. Our goal is to have our Read With Me interventionists all trained in Orton-Gillingham. We reapplied for the alternative delivery of supplemental instructional services money from the state of Minnesota. It's not technically a grant because it's not competitive, but we do need to apply every 2 years. We successfully were rewarded that money again for another 2-year cycle. And I would like to personally thank the board for your support during the staffing time period to help ensure that our interventionists were placed in logical positions, even though that we did not have the results of the ADSYS funding at that time. So thank you so much for your support for our interventionists and for our programs and your belief in that. We also formed a district literacy committee at the elementary level this year. We've spent several months looking at best practice, primarily using the Fontes and Pinnell. They have a continuum of literacy learning that's pre-K through grade 8, and so we've been working with a set of pre-K through grade 5 teachers, looking at best practice in literacy instruction. We've updated our literacy expectations, which is in the back, in the appendix, it's Appendix D in the document that you have. So after we looked at the best practices, we went back to our district literacy expectations and made sure that they aligned with our expectations. We also surveyed staff on current literacy practices to get a feeling for what are staff doing in their classroom right now so that we know their methods, the materials they're using, and where their needs are. And we also studied standards and determined priority standards for us to focus on in pre-K through 5 literacy. And currently, we also revised the learning targets that go along with those. We had existing learning targets, but we went back and re-examined them and revised them. So our next steps coming up for the literacy committee is that we are going to be developing common rubrics for grading around those priority standards that we've developed. And we will work on a process for implementation. And combining that with the information we're using with Illuminate DNA, which is our data warehousing system, I'm hoping that we'll be able to have those rubrics in there so that the teachers can very easily, at any given moment in time when they're working with the student, rather than testing, what we see as a typical test of a student, where they could ask targeted questions related to our priority standards and simply tap, 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 put it in the rubric, and it would be housed in there, and it would be very easy for the teachers to track how students are making progress towards certain standards. So that's in development right now. We have a bunch of people working on that. I'd also like to develop common benchmark assessments. We do have benchmark assessments, but with the advent of Illuminate DNA, we also have access now to a deeply sourced item bank that's standards-based. And so now that we have priority standards identified, we can go back and look at these benchmark assessments and connect them to the standards that we'll be targeting heavily. And I want to clarify, just because we've identified priority standards, it doesn't mean that we won't be addressing the other standards. We looked very carefully at how all the standards fold together. I think in literacy, in elementary literacy, there are, 46 specific benchmarks at each grade level, and a lot of them overlap. So for example, you might have vocabulary and reading informational text, vocabulary and literature, vocabulary when you write, and then even in the language strand, there's vocabulary. So there's a lot of overlap. So what we did was we tried to economize when we were making those decisions. And we'll also be working with teachers to make sure that they're addressing those other standards that may not be as closely monitored and addressed. Next year, what we're going to be doing, we're going to be looking at a variety of different materials coming up in June. And then with this committee, I don't really want to call it a pilot group, but with this committee then, we will implement the materials, the new rubrics, the targeted or the priority standards and such in the fall for next year. And we will begin, we'll implement, we'll revise, we'll refine, and then what we'll do is we'll bring everybody on slowly over the course of next year and through the summer so that all of our elementary teachers know what they need to be able to do, that they've had professional development, they understand the process, and that they're ready to go in 18-19. So our goal is to have all of our elementary school teachers ready to work under this new model by the fall of 18-19. For all of our staff, I'm also really excited to announce that we have funding set aside for, and I'm not taking credit for this because it happened over on this side of the table, but we have funding set aside to do another infusion of leveled readers for classroom libraries. So I think we have 142 expected classrooms next year or something similar to that. So it would be very expensive to fill out every single classroom library all at once. So as you know, a few years ago, we infused a set of books. Now we're going to be bringing in another set of books, and I'm hoping that this is something that we can continue periodically to bring fresh reading materials that are high interest and appropriate for the students so that they can feel successful when they're reading and be interested in what they're reading.
Excuse me, Karen.
Yep.
Is that something that you work with the media specialists as well to make sure that they're kind of working in tandem with the classroom teacher to make sure that they have?
We do have one of our elementary media specialists on our committee specifically for that purpose.
Oh, great. Okay.
And we have talked a little bit about how can we better partner with our media centers for reading. They're doing a great job already. It's not that they're not doing a good job. But typically when the kids go to the media center, then they'll pick up picture books or novels or whatnot that they specifically choose. And I have a son who struggles with reading, and in third grade he'd bring home Harry Potter. And so, you know, that's what he wanted to bring home, and that's what he tried when he brought it home, and we would read together, and it was a wonderful thing. We would read to him and whatnot, but in the classroom he had access to more appropriately leveled books that he could actually accomplish. So there is an overlap, but I do see them as being distinctly different as well.
Karen,
Yep.
in addition to the district providing these materials to the media centers, don't a lot of the schools have book fairs where parents kind of choose and promote books that would be appealing to kids? You want to talk about that a little bit?
Definitely. The elementary schools, I'm not sure how frequently they have them, but I do believe they have them a couple of times a year in conjunction with conferences. And my understanding is that they use Scholastic. I can't claim to know that definitively, but it's my understanding they use Scholastic. And so when people purchase books at the book fair, then not only do they get the books, but they get a certain percentage of the money that they can then use to spend on additional books. I also know that teachers, and it was even when I was teaching high school, it was a great day when I'd get my little Scholastic magazine with 60 copies of that newspaper printout that comes home. And so I know some of our classroom teachers also will send that home, and then they get points when students buy books, and the teachers are probably buying, I know they're buying books from Scholastic, and they get points and they can buy more books and whatnot.
Well, and my point being, you talked about some of the classrooms might at this point be somewhat lean. This is a way sometimes to supplement it.
And our PTAs, I would have to say, they've also been very generous with our schools helping to make sure that we have books in the classrooms.
Right, but that can be an equity issue, right? Because do we know that for a fact, do all schools have book fairs?
I do not know for a fact.
Okay.
It is something I can find out if you'd like me to.
No, I was just curious, because I know
Okay.
that can look different at every school, and
definitely
therefore the
can.
resources look different.
But this is one way to help. It's not going to solve that problem immediately, but it is a way to help make sure that we have books in our classroom that students can access. That'll be at their level. We'll also be offering ongoing professional development in press. Again, press is the reading tier 2 intervention that we are using at the elementary level. We'll continue giving professional development in balanced literacy practices. And then also we will be unifying our running record practices, which is it's not necessarily organic, but it's a very authentic reading assessment where you sit down and have a student read a passage with you and you ask them some questions, you talk about it, and they tell you what it was about, that kind of stuff. Currently, our intervention uses benchmark assessment system, and our classroom teachers use free materials from Teachers College from Columbia University. And they're finding there's a discrepancy between the levels that they're determining, and it's causing some confusion with kids and families and whatnot. So the Literacy Committee has opted to go with benchmark assessment system as a uniform running record or informal reading inventory assessment that we would do with all kids in the fall and the spring. So it's not new, it's replacing something that we've already been doing. Are there any other questions I can answer for you tonight? Mike?
Biggest question I have, and I'm going back to your first slide, which talked about the legislation. And the important part of that was to see where kids are in 3rd grade.
Yep.
Do we know numerically how are our kids doing? Are the majority of kids reaching that? And then a second question I'm very concerned about is remediation able to pick up the kids who are not, and how long? Is
Yep.
that like 6 months, a month, a year?
Well, it depends on, every child is unique, so it depends on the student's needs. Last year, we're just in the midst of getting a mountain of data right now. And so I've had a chance to look at some initial data, but I haven't had a chance to really sift through everything deeply. I know the information that we sent to the state for this report last year, it was very evident that the press practices that we were putting into place, tier 2 with the classroom teachers as a targeted intervention, were successful. Because as you know, with any initiative, when you implement it, it's bumpy and some people jump on board right away and other people are hesitant and some people just aren't ready yet. And so we kind of knew who the early adopters were, and so we could go back and look and say, oh, okay, we're seeing great growth here. I haven't had a chance to do that yet for this year.
But do you know what percent of our kids are proficient
For 3rd grade.
and have reached that benchmark?
I don't have that particular number in front of me right now.
I'd be curious to know.
I can get that for you. I do know it's in the Read Well, in the World's Best Workforce documentation. I'm sorry, I don't have that.
Karen, do you want to share the growth from 1st grade to 6th grade? That might be a good data point.
Sure, I would love to. Let's see, so I was doing some initial looking at our fast bridge testing, which is one of our local assessments that we use. It is nationally normed. 6 of our 9 elementary buildings increased their median percentile. And again, this is fresh data. We just finished testing on the 19th, so we really haven't had a chance to go very deep. But 6 of the 9 buildings have increased their median percentile. And then 7 of the 9 buildings have decreased the number of kids in the high-risk category. So this would be the students 19th and below. So we are seeing success that students are moving from risk category and improving into other categories. So it's not just that the median is changing, some of our neediest students are growing well as well.
And I appreciate knowing that, but I'd like to see numbers
I
sometime.
have that information right here. It looks like grade 3 last year, we had 67.5% on the MCA who scored proficient or above, and 80% on fast bridge testing who scored proficient or above.
Say that last number again.
80% for fast bridge.
And we don't have numbers for this year yet?
We do not have numbers for this year, to my knowledge.
When do those normally come out, or when would we?
Is it fast bridge numbers?
That's what
The
the MCA's, how long does
MCUs
it take to get that?
The preliminary data is out, but I think it's embargoed until,
July, okay. Can you speak just briefly to the role that volunteers and parents play in supporting the literacy growth for kids in our schools?
a little.
Okay.
I haven't done a formal study of all buildings. I do know that our communications department works with parents to have volunteer opportunities available through, what is the name of that program? The website where they can go in and,
I'm sorry, I'm not.
no, that's okay, the volunteer program where they can look on the site. I apologize, I put you on the spot. Yes, community thread. So there are opportunities there. Also in building communication, they send out opportunities for involvement as well. At Lake Elmo this year, the Rotary agreed to work with us with reading tutors. And so all of our, well, not all of our kindergarten students, but a select group of our kindergarten students were identified to work with Rotary reading tutors throughout the year, specifically to work on oral language development and vocabulary development. So when we looked for which kids would best fit this program, we looked for kids who may not have been read to as much when they were, before school started for them, that may potentially have limited vocabulary development because, as you most likely know, vocabulary development is critical for reading development. And so that's another thing that we did as well.
Do you have any feedback about that, how that has worked?
I do have feedback. I don't have that at my fingertips right now.
My question was similar to Sarah's, just that I didn't see much where parents could be supporting at home or, if there are things or if there will be in the future plans that parents could be supporting that at home for these kids that need a little bit more support.
We do, with our reading interventionists with Tier 3, and I'm just going to jot down a note so I don't forget. Okay. We do require with our Tier 3 interventions that they're in contact with the parents to talk about ways that they can improve or work with their students. And that is one of the areas where I would like to solidify our plan in how we communicate with parents for Tier 3 interventions. And then also, how can we make sure that we're providing information for them as well. They also are required to be involved with parents during family engagement nights. For example, Lily Lake had an activity. The Read With Me teachers had a booth right when you came in, and they were handing out brochures and flyers and ideas on how you can read with your children. And
Doesn't the Illuminate want that in the future have I kind of remember doing something where interventions would be part of that? And parents could access that, so they'd look at all of the information about their kids, and then there's some area where you can access as a parent, how do I support my student? I know we aren't there yet, but I know that's what we're working for when we have that parent access to that.
I have 3 questions. First of all, thank you very much for providing, looking at the, you've got the 2014-15. And we can look at that and see what has been accomplished and where we're at. And then that is very helpful. And with that, so when you're talking about that with Illuminate, is that, so your last 2 bullet points there, 1, research a data management program. So it says research, so has that been implemented, number 1, and then 2, improve parent notification regarding universal screening. Has that also, where is that? Is that improved? And then 3, love to hear that you're working with a group, your committee. Who is on, what types of people are on that committee is my 3rd question.
is it okay if I work backwards?
Sure.
Okay,
yeah.
so the committee is probably the simplest. We have a cross-section of teachers, pre-K through 5. Cross-section, I mean buildings across the district.
Okay.
We asked for volunteers to be a part of it. And then we went through and we tried to make sure that we had adequate representation as well. If, certain grades or certain buildings were underrepresented, we went out and recruited.
Okay.
We also have a couple of instructional coaches, 3, I think. We have an interventionist, we have a media specialist, we have 2 preschool teachers, and 2 principals.
Okay.
How many teachers?
I think we have 25 classroom teachers.
Karen, you have it on the back page also of the implementation that all listed specifically.
Thank you for including that. I'd really like to see those names so we kind of can.
I can get those for you. These,
Oh, they're in here, she said.
Appendix F, these
Right.
are teachers that we meet with to talk about read with me items, so that we
okay.
can clear some of our read with me plan as well.
Okay.
But we do have these people, many of these are on the literacy committee as well, and they are, I can get you that list of names if you'd like to see it, and as a representation, what grades, which buildings, what positions, and things like that.
Can you just clarify really quickly too?
Wait, you gotta answer my other two.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay,
Forgot.
so that was question
Okay,
3.
okay.
Question 2, sifting back through.
The data management.
Thank you.
The data management, yeah, and then just the.
We have
yeah.
adopted Illuminate Education,
Okay, so
or
that is
Illuminate
that.
DNA,
Okay.
data and assessment. It's a component of Illuminate, which is the parent company. Illuminate Education is the parent company.
Okay,
Currently, we have the last 2 years' worth of FastBridge data available on there, except for spring, and need to get that uploaded. And then last year's MCA data is available. We did build initially a few of our elementary literacy assessments, but we'd like to go back and revisit those. We also have many of our secondary teachers who are using it as a platform to administer and collect information on assessments. And we have a behavioral, social emotional behavioral team at one of our buildings that has also built information into the data management system to track, referrals for not major referrals, but to track those minor referrals to see, if we can find out commonality for time of day, type of incident, location. Does it have to do with the activity that's happening in the classroom? Is it that they haven't eaten? So to track a variety and look for patterns for that. So we are in the process of implementing it. It's not fully implemented at this time.
okay.
Is it accessible to parents?
There is a data portal that is accessible to parents, but we have not communicated that access
I've seen
yet.
it on the website, but I've just seen it.
Because I believe we want to make sure that we have the information available for them before we put them in.
So I just had a quick question too. Was that all of them?
Well,
Is
just
there
the
one
parent
more?
notifications,
Oh.
is that also been improved? Or where is that?
We met with the elementary principals this year, and we have communication information from FastBridge that teachers shared at conferences. And so
Okay.
that's how the information has been shared at this time.
At the conferences?
Yep.
Okay.
It will be much improved once we get the parents into DNA where they can see that information on there.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Sarah?
Okay. So when you talk about tier 2 interventions, is that something would that be somebody who has an IEP? Or that's already a special ed sort of identified person?
No,
Or is that
actually.
level 3? Or is that something totally separate?
That would be separate in this particular case. So if you
Okay.
if you can envision a pyramid,
Mhm.
and the base is your tier 1 instruction, it's your classroom instruction. It's supposed to be high quality, scientifically based, evidence-based instruction.
And everyone gets level 1?
Everybody gets
tier
level 1.
Right.
It's generally expected to be around 80% of your population. The next level would be tier 2. This would probably be around 15% of your population. These are students who would be below grade level, but not significantly below grade level, who would need some additional targeted instruction to help bump them back up into a full-fledged tier 1 experience. And that's being delivered at this time through our classroom teachers. Again, we're using press Pathways to Reading Excellence in School Sites. It's through the Minnesota Center for Reading Research from the University of Minnesota. And so the teachers look at their FastBridge data, they determine who may need Tier 2 intervention. They then do diagnostic assessments to determine what is the specific need. Is it that they're not able to recognize the last sound in a word? Okay, let's work on that. And then they instruct and they progress monitor and watch to see that there's growth and then move them to the next skill and so on. So that would be Tier 2. Tier 3 would be pull out more intensive intervention out of the classroom in groups of 3 to 5 students. Those students in Stillwater are generally below the 16th percentile, so 15th and below. And depending on the funding source, sometimes they're identified as special education already. Other times, they're not, depending on the funding source. And they progress monitor, they do diagnostic assessments as well. It's more intensive, less distractions. And then they can progress monitor more regularly to make sure that students are closing that gap. And if they're not, then is it appropriate to refer them to special education at that point? And you know, it's interesting, I was looking at our Read With Me data, and we had our students who, 8% of our students in Read With Me didn't make growth, and they ended up being qualifying for special education. So it was a match in that respect, so.
Karen, just a couple check. I hate to be linear, but I will.
That's okay.
First tier was 80%. The below grade level was 15%. And then this top tier is?
Would be about 5%.
Gotcha.
Yep.
That's what I thought.
Should be.
Thank you.
That depends on the district.
Sometimes
it depends on the
overlap.
needs. Yep. Paula?
On page 27 and 28, I just did the permission slip, so thank you so much, because I see some of them translated into I believe, Spanish. And I'm wondering if there, in addition to the letter, just to make it even more culturally responsive, if there are conversations with parents and families to give some examples of what that looks like. Because I think sometimes you may assume that they understand what work with your student on reading activities looks like. And so back to the conversation earlier about, are there some of that either face-to-face or other ways to communicate to parents of how to really have that
To work with their kids.
deliberate, meaningful interaction. And if that can't happen, or, because I'm not sure if the books, it says they'll be sent with students outside of school, if we have books in Spanish or in other languages, so if they would have access, those kind of things.
Books in other languages at this time, in general circulation, I would say are limited. Books in Spanish at Lake Elmo, I think they have a lot more access to books in Spanish, but the reading interventionists would need to go get them because we do not have them specifically for the intervention classroom. This is a discussion that we're having with the Spanish immersion program as well. How do we intervene with students who speak another language, specifically Spanish, because developmental Spanish is taught very differently than developmental English in how they teach reading. And I don't really have answers on that one right now. That's something that is in discussion. And I know that, you know, I met with Lake Elmo teachers, the Read With Me program yesterday at Lake Elmo, and they're very concerned about making sure that they know the best practices on how to work with their English language students. And they've been studying it, trying to figure out what can they do to separate reading need versus first and second language need. And so that's something that they're working on.
Great.
And I would like to help them as well. The conversation just came up yesterday. But
You know, Paula, I'm glad you brought that up, and I was actually contacted from someone, a resident, who's very heavily involved in the Lake Elmo Library, and he's always wondering how, you know, if he can come up with ideas to work with Lake Elmo, because it's right there, and I don't know, perhaps there's, some positive collaboration that could be done between Lake Elmo
Well,
and the
that was
library.
something we talked about yesterday too.
Oh, great, good.
I will
Great.
send you an email.
Okay,
They're
excellent.
interested in how can we get books into kids' hands.
Yes, yeah.
Especially over the summer. I know that one of the interventionists made a valiant effort last year to go to Cimarron every couple of weeks. She put out flyers and said, I'll be here, I'll bring her. She was like our own personal bookmobile outreach. And she saw limited success. And so we were brainstorming some ideas. How could we make it more exciting? Could we combine it maybe with their, they have like a market periodically near Lake Elmo. And
Yep.
how can we involve the Lake Elmo Library?
That can work. That's something, yes.
Fantastic. I'll send you an email.
Great, wonderful.
Well, and it's exciting to think with preschool in all of our schools next year, how that might impact just being able to give all kids access, to those earlier reading strategies and exposure, if you will. So.
No questions, but I have a couple of comments and a bias here.
Okay.
First of all, thanks for the philosophy and beliefs and language arts being in here. I think they're very good. I particularly like all students should be supported at home and school to develop a lifelong love of reading and learning. It'd be great if we could get more men into education so that elementary teachers were a nice male-female split so boys
Variety
could
of
see
role models.
male teachers reading. It'd be great if we could get every dad to read with their kids. That would be the home part of developing that lifelong love of reading. So thanks for that list. I think all four of those are very nice. Our primary reading goals are to help every child read at grade level and above by third grade. Makes total sense given what we've got to do. Working collaboratively across subject areas. God bless you for that. If we could get every science teacher teaching reading and math teacher teaching reading and history teacher teaching reading, English teachers wouldn't feel so put upon. The other thing I'd like to see in here would be something as a primary reading goal that goes back to that philosophy and says, develop that love of reading. I mean, it seems to me you're kind of doing that with your leveled readers and your, trying to get books into kids' hands. And I think part of the reason you're doing that is you want to develop readers early on because we know reading is the gateway drug, if you will, to everything else in education. If we don't accomplish this, it's nice that we've accomplished a lot of other stuff, but we've really missed the boat.
Yep, the engagement is critical.
So it seems to me that part of our task should be not can we get them to read so they read well by third grade, but so they continue to read through middle school and high school and beyond, no matter what they're doing, and they develop the love of learning so then they can pass it on to their kids and have that love of learning.
Would you see that more as a goal that you would add it to?
I would see that as the primary goal. These are nice secondary goals, but that's me.
I love that. I have to give a plug for the GATE program on this because my son struggles with that, and it's, you got to read at a high level and blah, 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 right? But his teachers in that program, when he goes home, they say, if you want to read, when you're at home, we just want you reading. If you read a cartoon, if you're reading a graphic art novel or graphic novel, whatever it is, they want these kids to just develop a desire to read. And I so appreciate George's comment there because what is the actual point? We want our kids to want to read. So thanks for saying that, George.
I think it's a really good point too, George, and I love the idea of maybe somehow making it one of the goals because we can get so caught up in our numbers and our assessments and our data and everything, and we sort of lose sight of the joy of what it is we're trying to instill in people's lives. And I really appreciate you saying that, George, because I agree. And I'm not sure how you would write that in as a goal, but also too, how do we inform and invite our families and parents to encourage these kinds of activities at home more and make it like more fun and
just a more part of our culture. This is a community that reads. We read. That's what we do here, you know.
And you
I'm
do
not
touch
sure.
upon it in your philosophy on reading, developing independent and lifelong literacy learners, and it could be adding what you had shared.
Karen, does anybody, George and I are probably the only two that probably remember this, so maybe it's archaic. Does anybody do reading as fundamental? What I can remember
I
as a
remember it
practice,
from when I was a
yeah, is that especially at the high school level, where it was kind of a floating schedule, and I think it was like once a month, and it might be once a month it was in social studies, and the next month it was in science. We're getting George. And the next month it's in math. And for that period, that day, it was only one day, all kids did was read when they went to that class. And so a lot of the practice was almost, again, using your media centers. You'd have a variety of books to read, etc. And the expectation was not only for students to be reading, but the teacher as well. There was one uninterrupted hour, so to speak.
Well, I do know that as a member of the high school English department, a former member, that we very much value independent reading, and it's woven into the schedule on a regular basis. Some people do a class period, some people do chunks of time, a certain number of days a week and whatnot, but it is something that is stressed at the high school level. I also know at the middle school level, we are working on a plan to create an environment where that can happen. It's just in a very, it's a very new stage. It's a little baby right now. But the instructional coaches, Andy and Eric, and Rachel and I are working on a plan to hopefully make that happen. It may not switch from class period to class period, but to have a period of time.
But I think whether it's, George talked about it with reading, but it could be writing, speaking, etc. It seems to me those are skills that can cross the curriculum.
Oh, definitely. And content literacy is actually my passion. I love early literacy as well, but content literacy is my passion. And I also, sorry, I'm just going to tell a brief story. One of the highlights of my career was when I was teaching at-risk students at the high school. And as a reading teacher, sometimes I had them for more than 1 year. Sometimes I had them for 3 years. And I had special books kind of behind my desk for the older readers. They weren't inappropriate, they were just older reader books, not sophomore books. You know what I mean? And one spring day, I had a group of senior boys, these huge men, standing behind my desk by those books, arguing about which book was the best book. And it still chokes me up. I mean, that was like, oh. So the love of reading is important. I know choice is important. I very much value it myself. So, yeah, I think we can add it.
Do they still do deer? Do they drop everything and?
They do different things.
Deer, squirt,
Right.
reading is fundamental.
Where they have, sustained reading.
Silent sustained reading.
Thank you.
Alrighty, thanks.
Thanks for hearing my last story there. Thank you.
You bring this to us at the next meeting for a vote.
Correct.
We're going to take a 5-minute break and these guys can get set up for what they need to do. We'll resume. Our next topic is QComp and instructional coaching. Josiah Hill, Deb Van Klein, Jennifer Marty, welcome.
Thank you, Superintendent Pontrelli, Board Chair Hepler, and the rest of the board. Our primary focus of tonight's presentation is to update you on QComp. We're at the end of year one. We started the presentation this past fall, and to just update you on some of the work and things that have been going on. I think, for the journey, as you will, as Jen and I have had this year, that the primary mission is really around helping our staff grow and develop and giving them opportunities and supporting them in a variety of things. But it's not just Jen and I, it's a real collaborative effort amongst L&I, our instructional coaches, building principals, the union members. I mean, it's a lot of people moving things in the direction of growth and development, which has really been a lot of fun to be in all the buildings and see all the amazing things that our teachers are doing.
Yeah, good evening, Superintendent Pontrelli, Board Chair Hebner, and the board. I would agree. I think when we started at the beginning of the year, Mr. Hill did a great job of talking to our teachers about the journey we went on when we did the new TD&E system that the state required a couple years ago. And to be very honest, as a teacher, I didn't really pay that much attention to it. I just decided I've got to do it, and I'm going to just work through it. And through this year, I've really learned it's not just about evaluation, and that's just the change that we have put in the last 2 years, state statute, but also the work that we can do. And I think a lot of the work Deb and I have been privy to be able to do this year is really about the development and the growth. And we are here, have our positions that really can support how that happens and how we can continue that progress happening. I guess as I was listening to everybody, my brain was just firing, because I think a lot of what we were talking about tonight was a lot of the what we want to do, but then there's the how we want to do it, and how do we support it, how do we progress monitor it, and how do we do that with teachers so that we can help students. So sometimes that kind of, can get lost. And I think that's some really exciting things that Deb and my positions can do in collaboration with so many other people.
Basically 3 components to the QComp plan itself. We have the teacher leader positions, in which there are 8 of them, and then the job embedded professional development, and then the TD&E, or the teacher development evaluation plan. We have done good work to get the teacher leader things off the ground and running, with the exception of induction mentors. We'll talk about that a little bit later in regards to where we're at with that development as part of our QComp plan. Really working with our district-wide PD committee, L&I, and admin to look at job-embedded PD and how does that look for teachers as they develop their goals and select their goals. How can we support them with the professional learning that goes along with that? So.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that is that I think that through the core components, it's really been able to take all of these things and align this work so that our TD&E system, our collaborative teams, our coaches, our mentor program, all of that synergizes into something together collectively that helps support teacher growth and then student achievement and well-being. So I think that through this work, it's not like these things are all separate silos and different appendages that people have to figure out how this works. I think we're trying to find that alignment and that synergy to help move those things forward.
As part of our annual review, we provided a survey to all of the union staff members, and they had some great things to say about the things that happened in this first year. And we're really looking to use that information to inform our decisions on how we continue to look at our teacher leader positions, how we're doing professional development, how the TD&E process is working for our teachers to help them grow and continue to support their growth. So it was exciting to see the things that they put based on our first year.
Yeah, I think the reason we chose those 3 things to highlight right now is because in the first year, we felt like these were things that teachers could probably speak to with the most authenticity. There's a lot of things in our plan, and probably these were the things we focused on the most and were able to probably legitimately say we supported. So that's where we chose those 3 things.
Talking about next steps, really looking to strengthen our communications of how QComp and teacher development evaluation and how that plan fits together. There are a lot of moving parts. You have QComp, you have the TD&E, and you have Talent Ed, and really communicating to our staff and administration on how those things all align and work together with each other. Working to align the goals for all stakeholders. I think probably an area of growth for myself over the years, just really understanding the complexity of all of the stakeholders involved in these 3 things. And it's more complex than I anticipated, but it's also great working with Jen and Josiah and everyone else to get this work going, because really I see it, we've talked about it as being an opportunity to really pull all these things together and move everybody working forward together, so we're excited about that. Continue to look at our collaborative team support or our PLCs, and then the Metra program development. For the Metra program development, we've interviewed teachers that were new this year to our district. We've surveyed all of our first-year teachers to see what kind of things they would like to see, for other first-year teachers. We've surveyed our principals to see what kind of supports would you like to see for a first-year member in your first-year staff member in your building. So we're gathering a lot of information to implement a few pilot things next year, and see how those things go, and then really looking to do a full implementation in that following year where it's district-wide for all of our buildings as far as that mentor program. So those are some pieces there.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I could say that has been a large benefit, I think, is that we have been able to work with every group of teachers in the entire school district, plus we get to also work with all the directors, executive directors, ECFC, principals, everybody. And so what that has really allowed us to do is, on a shallow end, we're new to this, but really bring and really be thoughtful about how it affects all kinds of different groups and which groups aren't being connected with. When we were listening to the first presentation about our change with early childhood and getting what they need at an early age, and then what's happening with our transitions groups. This year they said we were the first time, that they've had some actual real connections with some support on professional learning. And so not that I don't think people have done things, but this was a consistent, sustained time. We were able to work with them and repeatedly go back and work with those groups, along with all of our other groups and stakeholders. And then we were able to learn how many of the systems work together to help bring all of these things together, so that I go back to that word synergy, because I think that's how it helps support our teachers to make meaning of all of these things to help support our students. So it's been a really exciting year of learning for us.
So that's what we have for you. Any questions?
This is, so the first time this was either last November or it was the very first learning session. I'm not remembering which one, but I feel like there was something that you had mentioned was not developed yet as part of QComp, and I'm not remembering what that was.
The mentor program.
That was the mentor program?
Correct.
Okay, so that is still kind of being worked on and prioritized for future.
Yep, it's just we're continuing to develop it,
Okay.
Because one opportunity we've really had is to really, look across the state of Minnesota really, and look at what people do with their mentor programs, how it fits in with instructional coaching, collaborative teams, so that everything is working together. We're not doing the same thing with other people. So it's really we've been able to do a lot of that information to build. It was important to us that it be a quality program and that it be sustainable on those pieces. So we're just really trying to do it well.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I think the other thing, we did have a mentor program here, and we've had it over time in different times and places, but to her point, I think we've worked a lot with Andrea Schuler, who was coordinating it at the last point we had something, and at that point we did not have instructional coaches. And so really trying to figure out how do the two blend together, and what is the one's role and what is the other's role. And then the other thing is really about, next year with our transition, we have a lot of teachers who may be not new to the district, but might be new to their content area or to their grade level. And so we're being very thoughtful. Deb and I have done a lot of work with HR about just staffing in our buildings and working with our principals and coaches about what might your needs be in your buildings and how can we be more proactive so we don't have to be reactive. And there's been a lot of really exciting, good conversations to really help our teachers and our students next year. So very excited about that.
Two quick things that I would offer, and sorry to jump in. Part of that answer really speaks to the work that Jen and Deb have done this year, and how I view the whole of QComp. And when they've talked about trying to tie different elements together, that's what I've seen as a great strength of our first year of this program. So I know George was a part of the group that I served on, and we developed our teacher development evaluation plan. I sat in those rooms, I took part in that process, And then I've engaged in that process for 2 years before this year. When it came time to set goals for my third time through that process, I had the opportunity to work with not just my instructional coach from my school, but Jen and Deb were on site to help support people as they drew up their goals. And it felt right for the first time. It felt as though there was an alignment in an authentic way. And so the skill set that they brought to that made the process more authentic for me as I went through it. The other thing, as far as the whole program, when we talk about our instructional coaching programs, when we talk about our professional development, when we talk about our teacher development evaluation planning, QComp allows us to tie those things together and to run that, again, that alignment through them to help support people as they strive to. So I also want to pay a compliment to our QComp leads, and I think they've done a great job this year. It's difficult to build programming as they've moved through these opening months and now almost a year into it. They've grown a great deal, and they've connected a great deal with not just folks within the district, but reaching out to learn from others. And from what we have gathered, in interactions I've had, the first year of a QComp implementation comes with a lot of growing pains. And so as we move into the summer, our QComp board is going to continue to work to improve. We are going to work to address some of those growing pains and learn from the experiences we've had and strive to improve. And so we look forward to all those next steps.
Dr. Hill, I wrote that word down, alignment, that you had mentioned. I'm so excited to hear you talk about just that there is that connectivity and that the whole of the system knows what the other parts of the system are doing, and really to be able to be very deliberate about that. And I just had one question in terms of how some of the culturally responsive teaching and maybe equity coaching might fit into this puzzle, maybe in the future or currently, or what that might look like.
I know that we haven't specifically talked about how we might connect with the equity work that some of the work Bonnie and Terry and Eric have done, but I know that one of the things that we're currently working on for next year is in part of the TD&E process requirement. It's required that we have longitudinal student engagement data. And some of the things I was listening to us talk about here tonight really led to sometimes underachievement can really be about non-engaged students. And so, we don't just need excited students, we need engaged students. And so how do we really measure that, and what does that look like? And so Deb and I are doing some work right now with Bonnie and Terry about really thinking about for this summer, teachers have to do something with that over time. And what we would really hope and believe, we believe, that we really want to develop something meaningful for all of our stakeholders, our school site, because everybody works differently with kids. But how do we measure engagement? What is it? And how do we know that they're not engaged because of something that might be an equity issue? It might be a cultural issue, and not just culture being race, but just culture being all kinds of culture. And so we're really thinking, and we're really excited. We had an awesome meeting with Bonnie and Terry yesterday, and I was just like, if I had had that opportunity as a classroom teacher to sit and have, I have learned so much, and I'm really it's been challenging, but probably one of the best things I've ever done as a teacher, to be able to do this work. So I thank Josiah and Miss Moen and Mr. McDowell, and all the directors have been really supportive, because it's, I'm a 5th grade teacher who just came up here to do some work, and it's a little intimidating sometimes.
Never just.
So, but it's, you can feel that way. So it's been really great.
I would offer that opportunity is something that now Jen and Deb are taking out and sharing with our fellow staff members, and that, that element of our QComp plan is going to bring benefit as well.
George,
Yeah, go ahead.
I like what you've said. It's very encouraging, and to me it makes a lot of intuitive sense. The question I do wonder about a little bit, though, is metrics for success and what those might be. Like, for example, I look at the mentor program development. I'm a strong believer in mentors, and particularly for 2 reasons. One that I think is most commonly put out, particularly for educators, is retention of teachers. And it would seem to me that if you had a good mentorship, the numbers of retention are going to be improved. I think we can measure that.
Yeah, so we're working with HR and Brendan Nielsen, who has done a Metra program other places, and all those things you're talking about, we're looking at over the last 5 years, our teacher retention and what are some factors that might have affected that. But then where can we start with the mentor program then, so we know where we're at with that and evaluate that as we go through. Yep.
And see, I'm saying even extending it, I think another part of mentoring would be the ease of people coming in compared to those who didn't have mentorships. And again, I can't tell you specific items I test or look for in assessing that. But I also look at some of these others and the goals and say, all right, because what we're hoping happens, this transfers into student learning.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, I urge you to think a little bit about how do we measure that? And it seems to me most things can be measured. Now, the exactness or the correlations are sometimes questionable. But I throw that out more as a rhetorical challenge.
Yep, that's definitely on our radar. It's something that we want to be intentional about, because we need to understand the impact of our collaborative teams, understand the impact of our instructional coaches, understand the impact of the work we're doing, you know. And how do you know that unless you gather some sort of information around that, right, to drive our
Well, you might have a hunch, or you might have intuition, but it's nice if you got something in addition to go along with that.
Yep.
So I'm not skeptical of what you're doing. I'm just saying I think that would help sell the case, and hopefully these kinds of programs stay around. They just don't disappear after a couple of years, and I think that might make it more likely. Thank you.
Question. One of the components, one of the core components you have on here is teacher leader options. Can you say a little bit more about what that is, kind of like for the benefit of the public, or can you just talk about that a little more?
Yeah, as a component, I believe it's required that in the plans you write, your group that writes your plan writes specific positions for current teachers to apply to have leadership options, such as our positions. And then it can be different in different districts, but the way our board wrote it, some of our instructional coaches would be considered that position. The special education site coaches we have in our plan. We have our professional development committee that we have a district professional development. So these are all positions that would be teacher leader options, but they're usually connected to either a salary or a stipend as well. And so
so they're options that people could apply for, and
they have terms.
Okay.
Yep, and then they apply, like, for example, we applied through the regular system, but then we had to write a letter to the QComp board that stated why we wanted the position, and then we had to be interviewed by the board, and then that's how our group
position
did
got
it.
started. So this is a state requirement to have these, are all districts in the state of Minnesota doing this sort of work in their own way?
No, you apply for it, so it's a QComp
It's an
grant.
optional program?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
The teacher eval process is defined by statute, and you have to have it.
Yeah.
The QComp plan
Is
provides
optional.
compensation for some additional duties
It's a little
and parts
extra.
of that. Yep.
Yeah, okay.
And it's a way, I would say, since, to her point, the TD&E system is not an optional process for our teachers.
Right.
But this is an option, and the way we've worked through it for our teachers to have support and combine it with growth and development and have that more of a strength part, so it's not just about evaluation. That's the way I see it.
So is there quite a bit of guidance from the state on sort of, it sounds like there are some components that you have to meet in order to qualify for the QComp. So some of these pieces are really being guided by good research that's coming from the state saying this is best practice, this is an idea that works. And so we get to decide how that looks in our district, kind of. I mean, you guys are designing that and going through this process. And hopefully we'll have something built over the next few years that's totally sustainable and will lead to culture change and a long-term, process of growth, continued growth and innovation. That's awesome.
We hope that too.
Yes. Very exciting.
If I could just make a comment,
Yeah,
George,
go
I
ahead.
just wanted to piggyback on Josiah's comment that Devin and Jen have come in a year that is in a program that is very undefined, and I'm going to just tell you has been challenging for them, and we've seen it from our end, but have done a really good job and have done an awesome job of helping us to get this first year of QComp we would not be where we are without the work that they've done this year. They've done a really nice job. And the piece that's been impressed me most this year is, and I've heard Jen say this many times, is this is not a system of checking the box. They are trying to make this an authentic system and process where people aren't just checking off a box to say, I checked the box so I got my pay. They're trying to really make this a program where teachers are writing goals that are valuable and learning and kids are growing. So just thank you. It's been a rough year and a lot of work, but they've done a great job. And from our perspective, it's gone great. For a first year, it could have gone a lot worse than it did this year. I'll just tell you that. So.
It's truly been a collaborative effort, though. It has. I mean, we've had to work a lot with, like Deb said, it was a lot of complex systems that you can't just come in. And even though, if any of you have ever been in a position where you've had a job description, but that just tells you a lot of what you're supposed to do, but not how you do it with each person. And then with you have to figure out it's relationship building and it's community building and it's using and talking to people and getting viewpoints from all kinds of stakeholders so that you can make good decisions. And then you have to really come back and really talk to your directors and make sure you're moving in the direction that we're needing to go. And so I think Deb and I do a lot of talking. And I'm very thankful to have her too. That's good. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think the alignment that you talked about is important. I know there was a lot of fear when TDEP came in, how is this going to go and is it going to fit? And then you add QComp together, but it seems to me that if you can demystify building goals, individual goals, what you have to do for TDEP, what you have to do for QComp, if you can put all that together, I got your magician for getting that accomplished. So thanks for your work doing that.
Yeah, we want to get something together that defines what the difference between Talent Ed, TDEP, and QComp is, because they're all different. They're not the same thing.
Good luck. Thanks for coming out tonight.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda, we have facility fees and Pony Activity Center update, and that's Salma and Jody Lobline-Lecter.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Board Chair Hebner, Superintendent Pontrelli, and members of the board. We're going to actually provide two reports here. Jody's going to get set up real quick here. And these two reports really represent the bulk of Jody's work, not all of her work, mind you, this past year. She joined us this past fall and has been not only running, but I would say sprinting to work on two really important projects for us. One is our facility use fees, a review of that, and then the other is the PAC. I'm going to give her a little break after she shares with you some information about the facility fees, and I'll tell you about the PAC, but it really truly is her work. So I'll step aside. Oh, and you might find it helpful with this first presentation to wait until the end to ask questions so that you get the full scope of the project. So.
I've plugged into this before, but it's not seeming to show mine.
Do you?
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's right on the desktop there, if not already open.
Great, thanks.
Hi, my name is Jody Lobline-Lecter, and I've been working with facilities since September. We're going to talk to you tonight about proposed community education facility use fees. And what your facility use fees are is these are the fees that external groups will pay to use our facilities. If you take a look at this first piece of paper, this is our current rates that our different groups are being charged, okay? The pamphlet is our proposed rates. And then you have one other document in there, other than the presentation itself, are some different market rate case scenarios that we went through and the impact. So the purpose of this presentation is to talk to you about proposed rates, and some of those reasons is that this has not been done in the past 5 years. With that, we need to ensure that our costs are being covered from a facility standpoint as well as a staffing standpoint when we are having rentals. We have also new facilities that have been added to the district, and so we need to review those rates with the new spaces. And then we want to align our district facilities with those of neighboring districts and also those of districts with comparable facilities. The results of the study that I have gone through is that Stillwater is below average in many of our categories in terms of our facility use rates. How I came to that conclusion in the data that I used is 2016 May, the Metro facility coordinators started to gather their information together.
I don't know what happened to part of your screen, but
Yeah, it's
yeah.
we'll work through it. We have the presentation here too. So as part of the data, the facility use coordinators shared with one another the different categories that we have and the rates for each of those groupings. I took that data, we added in some of the neighboring districts as well as comparing districts that would have similar facilities. And here's a list of the different districts that were part of that. I took the average of those districts and then put in Stillwater's rates and compared where if we were a plus or minus on our Metro rate. So in looking at that information, one thing that you should know and you can see in our current facility use structure is that we have our preschool and elementary are listed together as one of our school levels. Then we have our junior highs, or next year our middle schools, and our high school. And so the rates at each of those facilities differ a little bit because what you get in an elementary gym or an elementary media center is going to be different from that of a high school facility. And then they're broken down into different groups. Our group 1 is our current internal users. These are, and groups, these are our internal school programs such as activities, adventure club, fine arts. This is the group of individuals that and programs that takes up most of the time of any of our facilities. And what's left over after they're done using it, we have the opportunity to rent out. So our group 2 users are the district youth groups. Those are the nonprofit in-district groups. And some examples of those would be the Valley Athletic Association, the swim club programs, Boy Scouts, Special Olympics, Chamber of Commerce. We have 89 of these accounts, and these are the accounts that I deal with on a daily basis. And our next group are those group 3. Those are nonprofit organizations within District 834 that are charging admissions for events. So something that might be in the auditorium or use of a tournament on the weekend where they're charging admissions for a team to participate in it. Also included in this are business commercial groups, church rental groups, and then nonprofit youth serving associations that might be practicing but are out of district. Some of these organizations are St. Croix Ballet, the Plie Dance Company, the Zephyr Theater Company, Matamidi Swim Team, our high school, which uses our pool. We have 19 of these accounts. Okay, and then the next group is our group 4. These are the out-of-district groups. They come here for various reasons, whether it's because we have the facilities to be able to host a larger event, or because they are geographically located around here, or because they want to have access to the amenities of the river or trail system or something of that sort. And there's 15 of these accounts. Okay. So the next part in looking at that is what are our current changes. I don't know why it's getting cut off, but we do have this as your rate. If you take a look at the, I don't know if it's a Control 4 on a PC. Is that the one, or on a Mac? Is that typically it?
I'd be tempted just to unplug the white plug there and plug that back in. I've never hit a Control 3, 4,
3.5.
It's still coming up too large.
No, that's all right.
So if you look in the elementary facility changes, we have made changes in the cafeteria, the kitchen, and the media center at all levels for Group 2, Group 3, and Group 4. The changes in Group 2 are nominal, and Group 3 and Group 4, because of the different organizations that are using them, are more in those areas. Junior high facility changes, we are making changes
keep talking. I'm
Okay.
sorry, we're just-
In the cafeteria, the kitchen, the media center, and the gymnasium. And when you look at why some of those changes that are in there, you'll notice that we do not have changes at all group levels. We have changes only in certain areas. And then likewise in the high school, we have the similar situation where we have some of the groups have proposed changes, and then we still stay consistent with the current rate that we're using in those spaces. The next piece with the district auditorium changes. This is a little bit more difficult. When I looked at the auditorium rates that we had, we were by far above average in our pricing structure on paper. And when you look at it on paper, we included the auditorium technician, we include the microphones, we include the podium, we include all the equipment. And we had a dance company who had just come in and is using our facility for the first time. They were asking about the different equipment prices. I'm like, nope, it's all part of that rental fee. And then she said, oh, good, because I've been charged for a garbage basket before. So to give you how we bundle those together, it's a nice amenity. But we do need to consider the cost of our auditorium technician. So what our plan is that we're going to take the auditoriums, and we're keeping Oakland as is. Those prices are staying at $40, $57, and $80 per hour. And we're separating out the junior high, next year's middle school, and the high school. And we are going to reduce the auditorium rate by $10 to make that rate closer to the Metro average. And then we're going to be charging hourly for our auditorium technician. Currently, like I said, that's bundled in there together. If we do have auditorium technician rates, that current rate has been $25. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a tiered approach for our billing of our auditorium technician. We're going to, from January 1st, 2018 through June 30th, 2019, we're going to charge $30 an hour. And then from July 1st of 2019 through June 30th of 2021, we're going to charge $35 an hour. And that's to account for any hours that our technician is doing lights or setup or working with the renter, the actual event, as well as any post-event setup that we might need for changing or transitioning. And when you look at the market rate fee case scenarios, this is where you might see some of the largest increase, because they will be charged for that auditorium technician time that they currently have been bundled in with our auditorium rates.
So Jody, you're talking about an additional fee.
Correct, yes, to ensure that our costs are being covered for our auditorium
So
staffing.
then when you combine those two things,
As it
does that
currently is.
put us in the middle range of what some of the other communities are doing?
When we combine them?
Like if you have the technician and the...
Yes, yes. But keep in mind, we're still not charging everybody for an individual microphone, an LCD projector, I mean, those things, which are part of those, some districts do that. And from a ease standpoint, it's just much easier for us to work with what the client needs and move forward.
Because not everyone who uses the auditorium needs to have the technician.
Correct.
So it's kind of actually a little bit
It
more
could be
flexible.
cheaper.
Could be cheaper if you don't need that.
Yes, but in most cases, when they are using the auditorium, they are using it for the sake of having a sink and needing the microphones and a projector or the soundboard. And we don't want other people operating our soundboards.
Yeah.
Other items to the change is that of our special access fee from a district staffing, a different district staffing position. And with that, our special access fee is that of our custodial fee. When they come in on the weekends, when the school building would otherwise be closed, it's currently costing any group $40 an hour. And so that price right now covers both Saturday and Sunday. Sundays are double time as the custodians are coming in, and that's not covering that cost. So when we look at our proposed change, we're looking to have the special access fee January 1st, 2018 through June 30th, 2019 to be $45 an hour on Saturdays and $50 an hour on Sunday. And then when we go to the next tiered approach, which would be July 1st, 2019 through June 30th, 2021, it would be $50 an hour on Saturdays and $60 an hour on Sundays and holidays. We are proposing changes to our kitchen manager, and those changes we are moving toward, we would move toward right away, because we've had in the last 2 years, 3 instances where a kitchen manager has been used. So it's very minimal times that has taken place. Then we are adding several new facility use fees, and those changes are that we're going to add a fee for a locker room, as it's likely with the addition of the PAC that we'll have more tournaments taking place, as well as out-of-district groups using it, so that we will be charging them to utilize the locker room, as well as us then having to clean the locker room for those purposes. A concession stand fee will be added. A bathroom field access fee, and that is if somebody is renting Pony Stadium and is coming in and using the new bathroom facilities that are part of the PAC, we would charge them $50 across the board to use that facility. And then another item that's new is our orchestra pit. It takes about 8 hours to put the pit up or down with 3 people. So we are adding a charge to that, and we would only allow for that charge to actually be applied if the event worked with the flow of what else we had going on with our current events, because there's just not a lot of time in that space. There's 2 items that we are still working on what those prices are going to be. One of them will depend, but the field lining is currently our group 2 is using all of our fields. We don't really have any additional time for any other groups using them. Is that they're paying $18 for a field for games or practices. And that doesn't account for the field prep of dragging the field, lining the field for games, mowing the lawn for any of the fields within this district, as well as getting the equipment to those spaces, the transportation, to bring them out to that area. So we're looking over the summer, the different costs associated with that, as well as a field lining fee. So if we are lining soccer fields or lacrosse or a football field for the first time, or for an event through which the lines have already disappeared, we're going to charge a fee for the amount of time with those fields. And then the snow removal, based upon an event that might take place, if the parking lot would not otherwise be plowed because we don't have any school events taking place there, we would charge a percentage of that snow removal fee to the group that's using it. With the market rate fee case scenarios, when we communicate to the different renters what our plan is, we will sort of looked at the percentage and the increase, and sort of identified how certain events might impact those changes for those groups. We will communicate to the different renters in a formal letter stating what the changes are, why they've been made. And then I'll meet individually with them, because we don't want to make it so cost prohibitive that they would end up going to a different facility. And we'd work with them through this transition period if there are challenges. So that is the plan for our proposed facility use fees. Do you have any questions?
This is under the new facility use fees, but my question is about the field lining. Like this weekend, I think there's a VFW baseball tournament up on the baseball fields. Do we have somebody come in and line the fields and then we charge the VFW? Can the VFW say, we'll line our own fields, we don't need you? How does that move forward?
Sure. Currently, the VFW and the Legion fields are the two, the B squad and the varsity field at the high school. And they have been caring for those 2 baseball fields themselves. They do not do the mowing, but that's the only 2 fields that we have, that those fields have been cared for by those teams because of the nature of the baseball mound that is far more sensitive based upon the clay and the material that's used, which we don't have in any of the other baseball facilities in the district.
So they can continue to do that with
Yes.
this? Okay, and then my other question is the bathroom field access. If I rent for a lacrosse tournament and I don't want to pay the bathroom field access, are there porta potties, or can they bring in porta?
Yep, they could bring in porta potties. We have porta potties. This is if somebody has an all-day tournament, maybe it's in colder weather, and they want to have that as an access and resource based upon the number of people that they have coming in.
But they have that option?
they could have that option. It would really depend on how many people they have coming in, because we don't, I mean, we have the porta potties that will house for a football game, but we probably aren't going to line it extra with 10, 15, 20 more,
Sure.
unless that's truly needed. If there's a gigantic race that's taking place, or we have a CrossFit America comes and that's televised, I mean, we would see it, and that certainly could be negotiable.
And is that $50 a one-time fee or per hour that they're?
I would say that as we listed it, it was a one-time fee, but it's also going to depend on the numbers. If it's an all-day event, it's going to cost more than $50 in consumables alone.
I had a couple questions. I might have missed it. PTAs, is that considered a
Parent.
Okay.
Parent associations.
In that kind of that lower category of group one. And then I know you kind of highlighted the kitchen staff so the fees, does that include then the custodial staff, or would there be an option if they needed extra custodial staff or anything? Is that?
Yeah. If we have tournaments at the PAC, we're going to have to identify how many custodians we would need to have on hand for the PAC and the competition gym, because it's a large space to accommodate for the bathrooms and any problems that we would have.
So is there a fee structure for just custodial? I might have missed it.
That's the special access fee. Right now, it's currently $40 an hour. If they come in outside of the normal business hours, school hours.
I guess I have a question. Why not implement all of this effective January 1st, 2018? I don't really see the reason why you wait a year to bump it $5. It just seems to me you start it and you identified that it's an increased cost.
You know, that was something that we discussed, and we went back on our different committee work on those items, and we felt that that would have been best practice to help alleviate costs associated to any of our in-district groups that otherwise might not be able to afford it. We don't want them to go to another place. We don't want it to cause them a problem. So if that's something that can help them, we'd work with them on it. And we felt that it was better to have a timeline approach as opposed to working with groups individually to be consistent.
And there was also the discussion to that of allowing these fee-based groups, BAA, whomever, to be able to plan accordingly with their families in increments, as opposed to a large jump maybe for your different renters in one, in half a year, all of a sudden there's going to be a fee change. So that was the discussion anyway.
And that's one of the things, and I think I brought it up before, that is a concern that if we're bumping up a lot for groups like BAA and then it's going to our families and it becomes cost prohibitive for our families, but we're making money already in community ed, so it just.
But to that, this is a community ed function, but quite honestly, the custodians, the operational costs, water, toilet paper, none of that we're not covering. So that means ultimately the general fund could be absorbing it. So yes, community ed functions with the facilities and does the rental piece, but then there's also, that comes back, and we have replacement costs for various things that are used. And so it's two funds at once. It's not just community ed, so I'd caution just looking at it as their fund balance.
I just want to make sure we're not just going to average because we can. That we're still being really sensitive to our community.
Well, and I guess I would share with you that we are still below average in many of the categories that we increased.
Mike?
Question I have as I look at this, and first of all, I commend you. I've been on the board 9 years. This is the most intensive study that I've seen done and brought to us. And to me, it represents a lot of work, so I commend you for that. A couple questions, though, that I have, and other people have hinted at, is what would be useful is to see what's happening at the district level in terms of revenues and expenditures, and to see the difference. So if we're making money, losing money, etc. And so I'm curious to know that. Again, shades that bother me, or at least I'm sensitive to, is that our district residents, no matter where they live, supported a levy, or not a levy, operational or non-operational facilities, and they invested $97 million plus. And so what I want to do on the one hand is balance that. And so I don't want it to appear that, golly, we're going to get it back and somehow that's going to pay. So that's why having those figures for what it's been on the district level, I think is very helpful. To what Kristen said, and you would probably know that better, then are you going to break out some of those costs? In other words, this part goes to community ed, this part goes to general ed or whatever, consumables and those kinds of needs that break out.
Yes, actually, the design, when both Annette and I started in our respective positions, was there was, it's reverse of what we're going to do. There was, correct me because I might actually state it reversed. There was a flat amount, or there was a flat amount that would get put aside for repair and replacement of equipment, reverse. So
Flat amount that would go to the general fund,
yes,
and then the remainder would go into an account to use for facilities. So essentially, the funds that we generate through the facilities rental, we first cover the costs associated with actually doing that work, because there's Jody's time, we have a staff person, an office person who helps us manage it, and then a variety of other individuals that interact with that in order to make it possible for us to rent our facilities. So we pay those costs. Once those costs are done, the remainder of those funds are transferred or put in a separate account at the end of the year. I think it's $35,000 that goes to the general fund, and then the remainder is used for facilities maintenance and repair and
we're going to flip that, because quite honestly, I think, and we agree with each other on this, that it's backwards. That is, we should designate a flat dollar amount for kind of the equipment repair, replacement, turf, all of that. And the remainder, as opposed to having a flat dollar amount coming into the general fund, the remainder comes into the general fund, because honestly, that $35,000 that's coming in to support general fund is not covering our overhead. It's not. With, like I say, just even Jody said, a $50 fee, given even volume on one day of using our utilities in a particular area isn't going to cover. So we're flipping that to help support what we know the general fund is probably subsidizing right now.
Yeah. See, but I think figures could help us support that case.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, if outside groups, and again, you got to be careful how you define outside groups. I'm saying the baseball leagues, lacrosse groups, especially if they're homegrown, those are our people. At the same time, the artificial turf's not going to last forever. And so if some of that eventually finds its way into replacement costs, I think that's kind of a sell.
Yes, and that is the plan.
Yeah, but I'm saying, again, if we get enough
where the rubber meets the road, is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, well, and I don't want to create a lot of work, but you're going to get questions. And so I think what you want to show, and I think we've been trying to do that, these are very appropriate. I question a little bit too on the comparables, because it's always, when you get different comparables the same night, that always strikes you. We had them for special ed tonight, they're very different. And so be careful how you choose that, especially if it turns out radically different. And I don't know, and I'm not saying it did here, but be careful sometimes what you use for comparables.
And when we had outliers of, like Forest Lake, for example, a neighboring district, in season, they don't charge their basketball teams anything for practice time. But out of season, they charge them a 6-hour time period for $120, and there's no wiggle room. So I totally took Forest Lake out of this mix because their numbers made everything go real high, and it didn't make sense. So we did go through some of that work with comparing Wayzata for the number of turf fields and looking at what they have versus what we now have. They include an indoor dome fee, and as part of their outdoor field associate that everybody's charged. So I, took some of that data out, and it didn't make sense.
And lastly, and it kind of goes to Shelley's point as well, I think for activities, it's very, very important. not to make it prohibitive for certain families or certain groups. And so, boy, that's tough to define. But also, what I heard for the first time, and I never thought of that before, is like even charging PTA groups for using. We don't do that?
We aren't. They're group one.
Good.
They're
I feel
considered
better
internally,
already.
yes.
Well, I think
That's what I
that
was going to ask you to clarify. What is a group two? Can you define that again?
Sure.
it's in the, if you look at your,
I know, but people out there don't see, like,
So
Just
Valley
for the
Athletic
public.
Associations, any of our nonprofit youth-serving organizations that utilize our facilities, they are not trying to make money, they're trying to provide a positive experience for kids. And if you look at these rate changes that we've made, we haven't made changes on the gymnasium except for group 4 at the junior highs.
Okay.
We haven't made changes on the fields except for some of the lining things, because we need to cover those costs that are associated with it. On any of those rates. We changed group 4 on the artificial turf practice. So those are out of district groups. And those are folks that are coming in, using our facilities and making money off of it. And a lot of money, I might add.
well, that's what I was gonna say. I mean, these changes for the groups that we would be most concerned about, which would be VAA, the change is pretty much insignificant. The changes to groups where they're charging and they're for-profit, we should be charging more for, and we haven't been. And it makes total sense, and even the amount we're charging is nominal probably for these people. It just, as a taxpayer, I'm happy to see this, because these are for-profit groups that are charging their participants, and there should be a fee for it.
But I would say group 3, a lot of those are nonprofits, but theirs will be going up pretty significantly. And just because they charge admission, I think they're still nonprofit organizations. So some of them will see a pretty high, like 22% increase.
But again, as well, when we talked about it at the finance committee, where I struggle is to say, a percent of increase is 22%. If your base is so skewed, the percentage looks really large. But if we haven't adjusted fees in half a decade plus and our base is super low, then to me, I don't know that I'd look as the percentage increase as the number. Plus, it also lends itself to the conversation of why are we staggering? Because GATE, for their admission price, the things that they do programmatically, they can adjust for.
And I want to get back to something Mike said, because I don't think, at least from my recollection, that we ever made a promise or implied that with the Pony Activity Center that there would be no cost whatsoever to the public for access. I think that was something that was still to be determined, and that a committee group of people would convene to kind of talk about what would be appropriate. But I think it was pretty explicit, at least from my understanding, that the bond itself was for the buildings and the physical space. It wasn't for the utilization and the use of the facilities. So
We're not on that yet, right? We're coming to that.
Your very first point was 5 years since last review. Does that mean 5 years since the fees changed?
That is my understanding.
Is that right?
Can you answer just a very simple question that's quite specific? Something like, there's a better term for this, so I'm going to apologize publicly, but something like old man basketball, for example, would that be a group 4? What is that?
I guess I would say that
I apologize. I know that's not appropriate. I just can't think of, they call it that, so they've been around for decades and they're proud of it, so.
I guess if you want to first qualify, it would fall under community ed. We'd have a community ed program, and people who come to play, if they register in advance, it would be $10 a month individually to do that, or it would be $5 if they want to do it at walk-in time per person.
So that falls into the umbrella of community ed?
Yes.
That's a program.
Got it.
Not a-
Okay.
A rental.
Okay.
And if there's a separate group of individuals, men or women, that want to rent the gym, then they would have to provide a certificate of insurance and be permitted that time.
Interesting. Thank you. Thanks. Sorry, I apologize.
Any other questions?
But you're a wise man basketball.
Wiseman man.
Jody, and again, you had the tears up there before. Where does organizations such as Relay for Life, what tier, where are they?
Relay for Life works under Group 1. I'm working with them for our upcoming event this summer. They are not charged any use of the field. They're not charged a custodian for that event, so they're not charged.
Yeah.
That's a unique circumstance.
Well,
Very
and I
unique
can remember
circumstance.
when that situation came directly to the board, so that one would fit. Then the other one I would say is this, and maybe it's a political issue, but there are a lot of older men or women in our community who don't get much direct use out of our facilities. I think, at least I've been approached, and I don't know if others have been approached, they're looking forward to the walking track, the running track. I think it's to our advantage that they become part of the usage of this community. So I'm saying, I don't remember promises either way. We're going to do this or not do that. I'm saying, beware, this is a very sensitive area to a very sensitive population who, in many, many ways, have treated us very well. So I'm saying, I warned some caution here.
Maybe you can transition over to
Yeah,
the.
does that make sense then? Okay. So the Pony Activity Center is two things really. It's a facility and it's a program. So first and foremost, it's a facility that was needed. We were moving ninth graders up to the high school, so we needed some additional space for our PE classes and for our activities and our sports and so on. And so first and foremost, the bond was meant to cover the building of the facility. And thank you, Paula, for clarifying that piece. I intended to share that as well, but you said it very eloquently that that there was an agreement that we would build the facility and make it the space it needed to be in order to serve the students first and foremost. Then beyond that then, as is the case with all of our facilities, we want to use that asset within the community, give them access to it, and provide them with opportunities to use it and enjoy it and have a connection with our schools and so on. And so, like every other community education program, when we build a program, we look at what are the costs associated with that program. In the case of the Pony Activity Center, we want to make sure that that building is managed in a way that we maintain security, because of course we have students in the building during the school day. We also want to have good equipment that is going to serve our students as well as our community well. We want to make sure that ongoing, that if this facility is of value to the community members, and that they're enjoying the equipment, that we can replace that equipment over time so that they can continue to do so. So all of those expenses were not a part of the bond. The bond was not intended to support the costs associated with this facility into perpetuity. It was truly meant to build the facility, and then we would functionalize it with what we call the Pony Activity Center as a program. So that's what this flyer that, and this is a draft, this is our proposals. We're sharing all of this information with you in different groups to get feedback and to hear what your thoughts are as it relates to how we hope to share this asset with the community. So you can see on the front page, we've listed on the right-hand side a couple of dates that right now we're hoping we're going to be able to provide an open house so people can come in and see the facility on September 15th. And that coincides with homecoming. So we hope to get some people in. And then, at least at this point, we plan to open the facility for use as of September 30th. That we wanted to give the high school just a little bit of time to get its feet on the ground in this new facility and with these new students before we started to open our doors and make this asset available to the community. On the left-hand side, you'll see we have a list of the different components that are there. We have an indoor walking track, we have some cardio equipment, we have weight and strength equipment, and we have gym space. We have just a little bit of information about the costs associated with it. I have more on the back, which we'll cover in a second. And one thing that we felt was really going to serve our community well Unlike other fitness centers, we intend to have no initiation fees, so you won't have to pay $120 just to sign up. And then there's no long-term commitment. You can go month by month. If you decide it isn't for you, then you can end your relationship with our Pony Activity Center. And at the very bottom, you'll see that we will have healthcare reimbursement available, that individuals who have, I can speak to the school districts, of course. If I go to the gym 12 times in a month, then I get a $20 reimbursement of the costs associated with having that membership. So we've been communicating with the organization that facilitates that process, and we are going to implement that. We've also had the opportunity to reach out to some of our larger employers in the area to find out if they have such a healthcare reimbursement, and we found that they do. And so we feel like a great number of our community members are going to be able to access this at nominal fees, and in some cases it may be no fee if they are truly coming 12 times a month. So let's take a...
How about for more mature citizens?
We do have a program for that as well.
Well, there's that silver and fit,
Yep.
or silver sneakers,
There's
one
two.
or the other.
Yes, and that, but we are
Are
in the
you
midst of...
working to do that?
You got it.
Are you a silver sneaker?
I'm a silver and fit.
Excuse me.
Who says?
Medica.
They're talking about a goal.
I just have a question. So about, because this has been something that I've been trying to wrap my arms around, and I see a little bit here under the proposed pack hours.
Yeah.
So limited access during the school day, check weekly. So how does the separation work with kids and classes and, the various activities and the safety component? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. So first of all, our access to the building will be replicated from the access at the front of the school. So right now, if you go into the administrative doors, you're greeted, and if there's reason to give you access to the building, then the individual that's sitting at the desk then provides you access to the building. The same will happen at the Pony Activity Center, that as community arrives at the building, they'll have to go through if you look at the layout of that facility, it's very similar to the administrative entry. It's a double door series, so they'll be forced during the school day to walk through the community education office, which is located right there. One of our community education offices is located right there. So they'll enter in there. Alexa, who is currently sitting out here, intends to move over and be the individual that will be there. She'll greet them, and then once we've established that they're a member, then they would be provided access to the Pony Activity Center. As far as them managing them when they're in the building, again, during the school day, there will be an individual that's upstairs on the track. In fact, all day long, there will be an individual that's upstairs on the track, because that's where the bulk of the activities are. We've got the walking track, we've got the cardio room, we've got the weight room. So that, and plus then that individual can also oversee the gymnasiums, because it overlooks, the track is open to the gymnasiums. As far as getting into the remaining part of the building, there are a set of doors that divide the pack from the rest of the school, and that the access is one way when those doors are shut. That the individuals that are in the pack cannot get into the school building unless they have an ID and can scan it.
Okay.
And then they can move into the building. So our PE staff, obviously with their badges, can move fluidly between the two sides, but that our community members cannot.
Okay.
So that's how we're going to manage that component of it.
Okay.
And that's our daytime. In the before and the after, again, we'll be replicating what we see happening in the school building, which is before and after school. Those main doors are open and the community can come in and out. So we intend to replicate that during those time frames.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
So, and it sounds to me, as I look at the schedule, like for the walking track, I'll just use that as an example. The hours are pretty similar to the bubble. We're people go in there presently and walk. Now, what you've also told me, and we laughed together a little bit on that, is that especially for seniors who qualify, say George used the example of Medica, they could almost use that then as their admittance, and that would pick up their fees really for a year.
Correct, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and another bonus to that is in the evening, parents who are dropping their kids off at gymnastics or going to wrestling or part of a rental, or like a VA practice, depending upon how that schedule works, or traveling girls and boys basketball, can go get a 45-minute workout in while practice is taking place, depending upon the rotation. Or if you're going to a sporting event at the school or a fine arts event, go get your workout in before, go to your event, or work out in after, depending upon what time it is. And it'll be a great opportunity.
So let me ask, piggybacking on that. First, I think the hours are great. They're actually much better than the bubble. So I think that's what I've been looking forward to. The thing that's a little harder for me is I'm afraid $40 a month for families might be prohibitive. And I don't know if you looked at, I know for some other things there's some daily rates, but at the bubble I can get a 20 punch card for $20 and I can make that last all winter. Because I wouldn't use it all the day, and my daughter has gymnastics at high school once a week, and we would walk. But that isn't really worth $40 a month if we're walking once a week together. Are there options for if your healthcare plan doesn't cover, or if finances are a little tighter, or that kind of thing?
So we certainly want to work with community members, and this goes for all community education. We want to work with community members to make sure that they're getting access to our programs. The prices that you see represented here is a combination of market research, looking at what's existing within our community, as well as the rates that are being charged at other facilities similar to ours. So other school districts are opening up their doors and doing these things. Combined with what the true costs will be associated to that we'll have those employee costs. And that, in addition to that, there'll be costs associated with the membership system, to scan a badge so they can get in and things like that, or member ID, I should say. And then also the long-term maintenance and care of this facility, so or the equipment and so on, I shouldn't say the facility. So it represents that balance, and of course, one of our goals was to make sure that it was accessible by community. As is the case with our healthcare reimbursement, 2 adults in a family can get the $20 reimbursement, so a family still would be at no cost in that circumstance. But I get that.
Yeah, like ours,
not
we don't
everybody
have that,
is that way.
so
Yeah.
I think what you just talked about though, if you'll notice, there's the track only versus the full membership. So if you were truly just walking on the track and that's all you wanted to do, that's $10 a month.
But we do that as a family, while
Gotcha,
the one
so all of
isn't.
you.
So then
Okay.
it is.
But I just wanted to point that out too,
Yeah.
because we haven't talked about that yet, that you can just decide to do the track, but if you want access to the cardio room and the weight room and the other equipment that's there, that's where you get into the adult memberships.
There's something you haven't talked about. What about parking?
Yes, so if you look at that facility right now, even, you'll see that they've added that section of parking lot that's at the far west side of the Pony Activity Center. That we intend to use as one of the primary sources of parking, especially during the school day, for the Pony Activity Center. Certainly anyone can park wherever they like. And, there is sort of that, you're going to a gym and you're going to park as close as you can. But there is a reality to that too, that if we have seniors that have moderate mobility that are coming during the day, we want them to be close enough so that they can get in.
We almost see the shuttle out there.
Yeah, that might be a conversation with Baltwell's, who knows, or one of our other senior housing units, if there's a way to help seniors to get in.
Because, bottom line is, we do want people to participate.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
It looks like you looked at a lot of other facilities, though. There's a massive amount of, when you compared your numbers, is that correct? I'm seeing a huge list here. Is that
that was for the facility fees.
Okay,
That was
fees.
for this.
Oh, okay,
part of
I'm
it.
sorry. So
This is the PAC, this is the Pony Activity Center, and it's just that.
Okay. So for that, did you also compare with?
Yes, I still have them calling me, asking me if I want to have a membership.
Yes,
I
you called
called,
all the different
I called places, every place here in Stillwater, every place, Oakdale, the YMCA's, the Lifetime Fitnesses, the mom and pop shops. I got all those price comparisons. And to be honest with you, we had all those price comparisons, but because we have limited time during the school day and we're not a fully operational, we're really based upon whatever the PE schedule is working with or with our activity schedule. And also we'll have tournaments that take place. We have some limitations. So, that's why our pricing is the way it is if you
It's
have.
lower than-
It's lower than any of those.
Did you compare it to like, and I'm sorry if you already said this, but some of the other schools, like say the Bloomington
Yep.
has that
Yep.
walking, so that's good.
Yes.
Good to hear.
Well,
Okay.
So if, I'm sorry, I was just gonna ask, I'm just remembering being at a school, I can't remember what district, that has a walking path like this above and my daughter used to be in volleyball, and we just walked it. So if you're here for a tournament, could you walk, if I was here as a parent of a child playing in a tournament, could I just walk
one
for free
time.
then, because I'm there watching my daughter?
If you want to pay the daily rate fee, you can. But
So
when
you
we
won't
have
access to the track if you're.
If you're a parent from another district and don't have a membership, you can pay the daily rate to walk around while the volleyball game's going. But we have to limit and control our access to the facility somehow, especially when we have those tournaments. We also want to keep that space available for our members, so we're going to have to tell people, I'm sorry, you can't put the video cameras up on the top, or this is a space for our members. And if you want a daily rate, you'll pay $5 to do that.
So there's a way to keep people from being able to access that unless they've paid their fee.
We have an individual that will be up there on the track all the time.
Okay.
There will be some
Looking for a
different colored
sticker or
wristbands associated to what you'll be accessing, but.
Well, and it seems to me also
To
what's
get an
relevant
implant.
is
Yes.
to our private vendors that deal in the clubs. They offer services that we won't.
Correct. But that brings up an
Whether it's a
interesting point.
personal trainer or whatever.
Yep, that brings up an interesting point. So this is about opening the doors and giving people access to a facility in part. But that community education offers a lot of fitness and other types of activities, and that we will continue to charge for those separately. So it's more of a cafeteria approach. So if you belong to the YMCA, you pay much more than $20 a month for an adult to access it, but you don't pay extra for their yoga or for their whatever you might take part in. The benefit, what we see as a benefit is that going forward as a result of this and our new relationship with those healthcare reimbursement plans is that if someone takes advantage of our yoga class or takes advantage of that can also count towards your 12 visits. So whereas we have not had the opportunity to provide people with, although we still have silver sneakers already, but that we haven't been able to provide other community members with a discounted rate as a result of a healthcare reimbursement, we will now be able to do that even for our community ed fitness classes.
And if they're a member and going to open volleyball, our building attendant at Stillwater Junior High can keep track of that list, turn it in, and then we say that, we scan the times that they were there at the gym.
Fake?
Something interesting, I'm sorry, just one quick comment. And I think this is kind of going to a little bit what Mike has been kind of getting to a little bit. That, obviously, these facilities cost a lot of money to keep them operational, to keep them safe, secure, clean, in working condition. It's a very expensive proposition, and it's a really nice benefit to our community. And if we don't charge fees, then we would have to get the money to pay for those things some other way. And it would have to come out of some other budget, like you were saying, Kristen, And so it really does kind of come down to how, as a community, if we want to use these places, if we want to have them, how would we like to pay for them? And this does seem like the best way because it allows us to kind of control who's coming and going, and it allows us to charge only the people who are actually using those spaces, a little bit. So it's I know it's not covering all of the costs of these facilities. We're doing that out of our budget as well, but this just seems like a good balance. Is that
It's
right?
exciting.
I think. Yeah, I think
Can't
it's
wait.
great. I'm excited too. I'm
Really excited.
very excited about the walking trail and the workout rooms. The view out of the windows of the
Amazing.
workout rooms.
Amazing.
Unbelievable. That's going to be very, very exciting during football season.
And just one last quick element that we neglected to mention is that there will be, you see it represented, the strength equipment. So because the cardio and weight room is not always available during the school day, that we did see, we did make it possible to have a little bit of strength equipment that will be available along the edge of the walking track. So if a community member comes, it won't be a part of the walking track only membership, but if they pay for full access, then they'll still have access even during the school day to some strength equipment that ensures that they can get a full body workout when they come to the facility.
Aren't you going to be a personal trainer out there?
My next life. Well, thanks for all the information. This is really beneficial.
Thank you. Tom, we're supposed to laugh at.
I was clearing my throat.
Oh.
He's gonna come back to me. That old man.
Okay, our next item is preliminary budget for 2017-28. Kristen?
You should have been provided with 3 documents. One is the budget assumptions for 3 years that is dated February 14th of 17. The other is a 1-page document that says FY 17-18 preliminary document, or preliminary budget May, and then you have your budget book. The only reference I would like to make as far as the budget assumptions go, all of this is in your book. This is what the committee work that was done. We do know legislatively that we could be looking at a slightly more in state aid than we projected. We projected 1.5, and it sounds like we'll be getting 2. And then, you know, questions on enrollment. But at the time, all of this detail is in here. So that's why I provided this. Even though it was 3 years, we were working on individual years of assumptions. Then I'd like to focus your attention on the next single page, because we work from here into detail. And this kind of gets to what we talk about when we pull out the different types of fund balance. So the numbers that will match when you take this page and you look in your green book are where it just says revenue budget and expenditure budget. So it's 103 million for revenue, and I'm just going to round or use the first 3 digits, an expenditure budget of 104,000. That's what's in your book. That's what you will see. But I know as a school board and as a district, we work our way through because we do have reserved accounts, appropriated accounts. There's other accounts that come into play or fund, you know, that we pull out to get to our bottom line unassigned fund balance. And so what we did here is, and we pulled out operating capital and long-term facility maintenance because those are reserved accounts. The state says you need to set that money aside for those particular purposes. We did that in both revenue and expenditure. So now your adjusted is the number that we look at to get to the unassigned fund balance. We are right now looking at between the projected fund balance at the very top of the page of 7.9. That was the last fund balance that we did with the revised budget, probably off of November work, we're estimating June of 18 coming in at 7.2, which means our revenue to expenditures are off by approximately $680,000, give or take. Not reaching the board goal of a balanced budget by definition because your revenues don't equal expenditures. Shelley?
You'll probably get to this, but because the assumption was 1.5 and it's looking like 2, how does that help that?
If you were to just do rough math, it's about $275,000 that it would go down. Okay. Again, it's assumptions. I just want to point out you're not balanced. It's not something that I would have come back and made a recommendation to make reductions on. And also, we had talked about, and it's reflective in the budget, that we've had, with the grade configuration change, we've had the adjustment to 600 kids going to our first tier of busing, which equates to over 600,000. So not that is the difference, we can hang our hat on it, but it's that number is kind of, you know, there's been other adjustments too, but that's that number. So when I speak to the budget, I'll be speaking kind of to this page, but I'd like to walk you through the book if possible, because I will not do this when asking for adoption of the preliminary budget on June 8th. And I would ask you to turn to the Section 1 Introduction
which is the triple I on the bottom. It's the brief history of District 834. At the time that, and it's verbiage that I want to draw your attention to. At the time that this budget book was even created, we were doing it without knowing where we would land with the lawsuit as far as the stay implication and closing the 3 buildings. And so the verbiage in the second paragraph says that we will have 10 elementary schools open, but K-5, but you will see an asterisk. And that asterisk brings you down to the bottom that says the budget is based on the estimated operation of 7 elementary schools. So this budget is based on those buildings being closed, but at the time this document was created, we had to identify that they are open and they were continuing to be open during the process. So just wanted to highlight that as we move to 4, the very next page. This just outlines when I do the budget cycle. In the spring, we're going through the work, we adopt, we do the levy in the summer, we look at our numbers in the fall, you're readopting. It provides us kind of the life cycle of a budget, if you will. And then the following page is, I'd like you to look at the enrollment trends and enrollment projections. There's one bar graph, the first bar graph separates the enrollment out K6, 7, 9, and then the second one changes our grade configuration. So we're going to have a handful of years where we're going to have to carry 2 bar graphs. So you can kind of, if you're just looking at the overall district numbers, you will get to the bottom line, and I would, from 2013, we had 8,415, and we were projecting our estimate for 17-18 of 8,157. Again, your categories change because our grade levels changed as far as configuration, but I wanted to keep both of these charts in place so you can kind of see what's happening to our enrollment. And then just another highlight, one of the assumptions was with the employee contracts and gen ed. With the employee contracts, we assumed steps and lanes, no increases, and general education revenue, we assumed 1.5%. Now I will ask you to turn to section 2, page 1, which is the preliminary budget, identified as budget process and assumptions. What happens with the staffing allocation that is listed in the charts to the side says this is what we staff at. It's not our range, it's not our average class size. This is the number, the midline number that we look at. Again, it looks different. We had to pull out grade 6 because grade 6 was represented as elementary before, and now it's not. And then you can also see that there was an increase to supply and material. A small increase to supply and materials for district budget. Any questions thus far before I kind of get into the numbers of all of it? Mike?
I have a question. Why can't you, since we're adopting this in June, and we now know that the stay and the lawsuits are over, change that verbiage to read that we are Stillwater area schools is going to serve more than 8,300 students in 7 elementary schools.
I certainly can. And I think you guys have the bound book. What was provided for the public was a draft version. So I can certainly make that change. And if you request, I can give you another bound book. But I would make the change, and that's what would be represented on our website and what the board would officially adopt. When information was given to Barb.
Right.
In the finance committee, we didn't have that at that time.
But now we now know where to stand with all of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you do want an updated book, we can certainly run that too.
I don't need that.
Okay.
Is this when we look at those staffing allocations, and now we have a 6, 7, 8, I guess why, is 6 a standalone? Why not 6, 7, 8 at pick a number?
Yeah.
And why not 9 through 12 pick a number?
So the reason that we've done it this way is because the board approved staffing ratios when we did staffing, still had 6th grade at the old numbers. And so we left this to be consistent, and we actually staffed with the 6th grade at these numbers. because 17, 18 is what we'd already done that staffing and allocations. So this will need to be shifted when we do the budget next year, so that when we staff, it gets shifted to the 6 through 8.
Okay, so I'm unclear still, sorry. When would we look at changing? So next year's kind of set for the staffing allocation. So if we want to talk about it for the following year, when do we have that conversation?
I would say probably when you do your
And we can start
conversations
now.
for your primers next
What
year.
conversation about adding staff?
About, because we keep hearing class size, so
Yep.
if we want to change.
Oh, if you're
So
looking
we
at
would-
changing.
So to George's point, you could have 6, 7, 8, and then whatever that ratio or number would be.
For next year, we've already staffed at these
Yeah,
ratios,
no, but
the
so when
following
you,
year.
I think I'm following up on Shelley, when would we decide then, for 6, 7, 8, here's the class size ratio?
I believe when you set these new.
Well,
when
and you can
decide
have
the
that
finance
conversation
curve.
and decide whenever you, I mean, that is appropriate that you could start that conversation tomorrow if you wanted to.
But we have to do it before you
no-
get
we start
numbers
staffing.
Before Kathy
for
starts staffing.
2018,
For 18, 19.
19.
Right.
Yes.
So when these assumptions get set by the finance committee and you look at them, you would look at that ratio and change it for next round, right?
Well, this wouldn't be the finance committee that would do that assumption, but
Okay.
we can talk, but again, it's appropriate to start, we could start having those conversations now, so they would be ready to go for staffing for 18, 19.
Which is when? Is it April or is it before?
We need to know by December.
Yeah.
So that's why it's appropriate.
So then we can look at budget implications,
Mhm.
because of course there would be huge budget
Correct.
implications, just where we would find that money.
And remember, this year, we shifted everything way up and we started our staffing process early, so we had already staffed on this.
Way early, yeah.
So this is a set number right here, these assumptions are set, or can they be,
For the way we did
Tweaked.
it for next year, yes.
they're
Could
set
they
for
be
next
tweaked?
year? Yeah, could they be tweaked? Just asking,
Like in a situation that
just
there was
curious.
kind of,
We look at the numbers as they come in over the summer, and while we're getting people, we watch those numbers throughout the summer because they shift all the time, and we'll ask to tweak and add one if we see somebody bubbling up high or low. I think that there's a lot of volatility, right, in what might be the elementary numbers as far as K-6. So I would really recommend that you wait and look at what your October 1 numbers are, because then you'll know what that looks like.
So just to follow up on that, thank you for that. So say October 1, can we get information on where we're at and where we may need,
You will get
And
that.
so to me, there's different implications. To change the staffing allocation district-wide could ultimately mean you're trying to shift grades right now, or shift class size or whatever right now. That would be challenging, in that we anticipate volatility in our K-6 numbers. You can always add staff. We can look at those numbers and you can always add staff. Once we have staff, we're limited in how we would adjust to reduce.
right, yeah, that makes sense.
So
That's really the question I have too. One is, and I don't know the numbers, maybe you do, but I don't, is one, we've got a charter school in the north. I think to me what's a big question out there is how many kids District 834 is going to retain and how many they're going to lose. Now, suppose it's X number and we turn out to have less staff. Can you do anything about that, or are you frozen to those numbers right now?
You're pretty much staffed. We have purposely kind of held back some positions and not filled them at some of the buildings, just to try to not be staffed too high. But pretty much once we have staff and we've hired them and they've given up a contract in another district,
Sure.
it wouldn't be a good thing to tell them you changed your mind.
And always the flip side, the tough one for you guys, is because there are candidates you'd love to hire and have proven very strong, and come what may, if you have to add sections, it's a smaller pool.
Right.
I mean, that's a reality. But you answered my question, and that's, you're still don't know what those numbers are gonna be. And, you know, people, it's always been my experience, when people come to the district, they're real quick to register. You know, get my kid